Commission meeting for June 22nd, 2022 to order. Joe, if you go ahead and read the instructions, please.
Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. All panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Please continue to use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak. The name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. City staff will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the Transportation Commission, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair Kovich, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Aiden, if you call the roll, please.
Absolutely. So Charles Miazzi, who I don't see yet. Barbara Harrington McKinney.
Present.
Chris McCahill.
Here.
Ann Kovich.
Here.
Denise Jess.
Here.
Robbie Weber. Let's see. Patricia Bennett.
Here.
Bridget Brown.
Here.
Bill Bremer.
Here.
Harold Cleaves.
Here.
And Darren Wozniewski.
Here.
So Aiden, it looks like we're missing two people. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so Harold and Darren, you'd be able to vote for right now. So we'll sort of keep our eye on that. And Aiden, if you see either Alden Miazzi or Robbie enter the meeting, if you let us know, that would be great.
Sure.
Chair, I just received an email from Robbie. She's just having some technical difficulties, but is doing a restart and should be on shortly.
Okay, thank you. Everybody have an opportunity to look at the minutes from the last meeting. Bill?
I'll make a motion for approval of the minutes from the June 8th meeting.
There's a motion by Bill. Denise, is that a second?
It is.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, Bill, I assume your hand's still up from the motion. Okay, so seeing no hands for discussion, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands, the motion is carried. Do we have any public comment this evening under item 1?
We do, but not for item 1.
Okay. All right. How about disclosures or recusals this evening? Okay, seeing none. For the consent agenda, we just have one item this evening. Did anybody, do we have anybody registered to speak on item 2?
We do not.
Okay, or anybody registered at all for item 2? No? Okay. Did anybody wish to have that separated from the consent agenda for discussion? Okay, is there a motion on the consent agenda? Harold?
Move approval.
There's a motion. Bill?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Then you will assume a unanimous consent approval unless anybody wishes to vote no on the consent agenda. So please raise your hand. Okay, the motion is carried. So we will move on to item 3. And I know we have somebody registered to speak for item 3, and we also have Alder, am I saying your name correctly, Tischler? Hopefully I'm saying that name correctly. Okay,
that is correct. Thank you.
Okay, and I know that as a conflict, and has to leave at 5:30. already. So, and also would like to make some comments before he does leave. So, Renee, if we want to go ahead and have a staff presentation, I know we have somebody registered to speak, but if we can kind of watch the clock a little bit to make sure that we hear from Alder Tischler before he has to leave.
Okay, I'll try to be super efficient. I want to provide some information because I know these crossing guard decisions are super hard to make. And in an ideal world, we'd have lots of crossing guards, but we have these policies because we need to be really efficient in where we place them. And I did want to mention that also Alex Stewart, who is our West Side Crossing Guard supervisor, is with us tonight in case there are kind of more systems-oriented questions that he might better answer. Virginia, who's our East Side supervisor, is off right now, and then Gretchen Aviles Pinheiro, who helps with the studies, is here if we have questions. But I will launch into a hopefully rather brief presentation so we can also have questions and discussion. But first, there's two different kinds we'll be talking about. One is studies for brand new locations where we haven't had a guard before. Those are requested through the principal to our school traffic safety committee, and then we do these studies that you would have seen attached to determine if it meets our policy or not. And this is kind of what we look at. Oh, wait, I am not. Let me go to the slideshow here. There we go. From current slide. All right. All right. So, and then we also have existing locations where we determine that counts have fallen off below kind of our minimums, and it seems to be a continuing trend. So we also study those. We look at counts done by our crossing guards semi-annually, and our school traffic safety committee isn't technically involved, but we definitely talk about these when we determine that we're going to put them on the list for a study. So these are just the hazard ratings. If you clicked on the information, this is kind of the metrics that were set with our policy for the hazard rating points and the number of students that you need to have a location or to continue a location. So that's kind of what we're looking at when we put those study sheets in and make our recommendations, is this particular piece. It is online. If you didn't click on it and you kind of want to look at what the full policy says, you can do that. I'm going to skip ahead. This is who our school traffic safety committee is. It is the school district, traffic engineering, the police department, and Safe Routes to School program staff, which is through the Wisconsin Bike Fed. And we actually this year have been meeting every other week because we feel like we have a lot of work to do. And we really want to kind of get on top of school safety. So some of those safe streets projects you've seen have also come from the traffic safety committee work, and you'll be seeing a lot more of that going forward. We have a great group that's really engaged in this work right now. So just looking back at 2021, we did approve one new crossing guard location at a new elementary school, which is technically Middleton Cross Plains. But we did, there was a decision to kind of defer the rest due to the pandemic and kind of just the impacts on traffic patterns and students deciding to walk or not walk. So those were deferred. And so we redid all of those studies. And then there was one new location that we did add this year. So you should have seen the ones we were reviewing for elimination, the ones for addition, so I'll just jump right in. First would be that Atwood at Division, where numbers have started to fall off, and you'll see this year there was no one crossing there. But we did note when the person was out doing the study that there were 11 kind of elementary aged kids during that time period using the capital city path. So it just may be kind of a change due to that seeming like a better place. And also for kids going to Lapham who are biking, that would be a good route for them. It is a longer walk and they do get bus service. So that may be part of what's going on. But you'll see it has kind of been quite low. And then the hazard ratings are lower in that area as well. And it could be just some changing demographics. I put this map in. It's not It doesn't tell you exactly how many kids might use this crosswalk, but it is some census data that we got from the school district about elementary school kids. And it does show you that perhaps there are some changing demographics. And you can see that over here at Dunning down to the path, it may be a more attractive route for where the students are currently living. And as mentioned, there is eligibility for busing to Lapham, and this just shows it's the one-way part. There is a continental crosswalk. It is lit, so that's kind of what it looks like currently as a crossing. For Elvium, this is Buckeye at Droster. Also, is a place where we haven't had a crossing guard this year due to shortages in our crossing guard staff. We did have one part of the year last year, and they reported that they did have two, but then those two kids stopped walking, and then they transferred to a new location, and we were not able to replace them. But the numbers have dwindled there. A slightly higher hazard rating of 19 in the morning, 24 in the afternoon. Also kind of on the edge of the attendance area, as you can, it kind of serves a smaller part of the neighborhood. Looking at this map, there is a lot of kids who kind of live in the outer part of it. It is a little bit of a longer walk because of the street network from there. So it may be kind of a less appealing walk distance for families with smaller children. There is an RFB and an island at that location currently, so definitely that helps with the children or families who are still crossing there, and that has been there for a while. Mineral Point at Midvale also being studied again, and we have definitely seen numbers falling off there. But much not unexpected, a higher hazard rating. This is a very busy intersection. And once again, it is kind of at the edges of the neighborhood. So a lot of the kids who would cross here are going to be kind of in a narrow band along Midvale, who would come down to Mineral Point. So there, are still kids who live in that area, but perhaps smaller than to the east. And however, this is a crossing that is larger than it used to be. That left turn lane got added in for safety for motor vehicle drivers, but that definitely lengthens the crosswalk. However, we do have another crossing at Owen and Mineral Point, and it is very heavily used by the neighborhood. So it just may be that more of the families are living there or they prefer that crossing. But, without a crossing guard, you would probably walk out of your way to Owen to use it if that wasn't too far. So for Thoreau, once again, Glenway at Monroe, more at the eastern edge of the attendance area. And also we had a crossing guard there up until after the pandemic. We have not had staffing here since then. Numbers are quite low with 1 to 2 students. But even in 2019, in the fall, we're just seeing 2 children crossing there. Also, a slightly higher hazard rating, particularly in the afternoon when it's 32, so a higher hazard for sure. And you can see here on this attendance area map, there is definitely students who live in the neighborhood, but definitely some areas that no longer have as many elementary students that are closest to that location. And in 2018, Monroe Street was completely redone. Glenway does have that raised crossing at that location, and the red crosswalks, which are meant to highlight that area. So that is a change that has happened. So these are the new ones. So Orchard Ridge, Raymond at Leland was requested just before the pandemic for study. So our first study was not until 2021. And we saw this year quite a jump up in the number of students crossing. It definitely doesn't meet the policy of 25, but we were at 15 in the morning, 8 in the afternoon, and a hazard rating of 29 and 26. And I would mention this is a street that we did see some of the higher speed traffic at this crossing. So those 85th percentile speeds were quite high on Raymond Road. And you can see from this attendance map, there is definitely in the Balsam and Thrush area, which is kind of the edge of the attendance area, there are quite a few families with elementary students in that area. So I think the numbers are not at 25, but there is, it is a strong attendance area for children. And you can see here there was an RFB added in 2020, but this is, for travel lanes with a boulevard and a bike and parking lane. So it is a large area. It does have that pedestrian refuge area for making more of a two-stage crossing, but definitely a lengthy crossing. So then we come to Van Nuys for Seagull at Richland, and that was requested back in fall of 2019. We've seen a slight increase this year in the number of students crossing, up to 15 in the PM, so still not quite meeting that 25, but the hazard rating at 49 and 50 as well within our recommended range, but we're not also meeting that second metric of 25 students. So that's why you'll see that it was not recommended. It's a combination. They have to meet two things, but definitely meeting that hazard rating here. And you'll see this is the attendance area. Definitely elementary school students are in this neighborhood. There is a mid-block crossing that is also very popular a little bit more to the north, but still lots of families in this area. And here's just a picture. This one, it shows that it does not have a pedestrian refuge island. So the gaps are timed up crossing the entire length, not just a two-stage crossing. So this is a 29-second crossing at 88 feet. This has had buffered bike lanes added, so some changes in the overall use of the space. We did restrict U-turns. We added that RFB, and then this year, the Safe Streets Madison has approved it for a speed reduction as well. So it's currently 30 miles per hour, but it is marked as a school zone, but it will be reduced to 25. And then we did study for Thoreau Elementary, this kind of Hammersley, Nakoma crossing at Midvale. There is a new apartment building where there was some feeling from the principal that perhaps families would be living there. However, it is built, it is kind of a mix of studio 1 and 2 bedrooms. So there could be families in the future. It doesn't appear to be that yet, or not very much. So we definitely would want to keep an eye on that, but we didn't have any children crossing there. It does have a lower hazard rating currently. The kids who live sort of south of that area do have a bridge at Winona to cross, so would be more likely to cross there. And I think there's some emails, and I definitely, and the principal have heard now from families who have been talking about this, and I think they'll probably request Cherokee for a study because the neighborhood felt like that was Cherokee and Midvale more where families would cross, and more families might cross if there was a crossing guard. So we haven't studied that, but I believe one of the emails was about that location. And here you can see this location. And as I mentioned, Marlboro neighborhood also does have bus service. And we definitely can work with the principal if he feels that Cherokee location should be studied in the future. So then there's Pope Farm, where we did add a crossing guard at one of the crossings, and it continues to have many children using it. We did say we would study an area north and south of there. The area north of there, which is Shave and River Birch, did see 24 kids crossing, so definitely getting right at that point. But they have a hazard rating currently of 12. And Old Sock and Shave has just a couple, 3 to 5 last year and 2 kids this year, and a 17 to 18 hazard rating. So definitely not quite meeting the metrics, but you can see that this is an area that is changing quite a bit. And here's just a picture. You can see Old Socket Shave is kind of right at the edge of the urban area, where then it kind of, you can see Pope Farm Conservancy. It's kind of more rural, but as I said, very much a developing area, new homes coming. And then Shave at River Birch does have a sidewalk continental crossing to a path that leads to the school. So I did want to talk a little bit about equity because we haven't done a full RESG analysis, but I think we definitely wanted to consider it. I'm showing you the areas using the Metropolitan Planning Organization's environmental justice areas. We've been using that for our Safe Streets Madison scoring, so it felt appropriate to just show that this way as well. And I'll just scroll ahead to where we do have an environmental justice area, which would be the Orchard Ridge, Raymond at Leland. You can see it is a tier 1 area here where the kids would be walking. We did note most of the kids were walking by themselves, not with an adult at this particular location. I'm also just going to Van Nuys Elementary. This area that is a tier 1 is really not serviced by this particular crossing guard, but north of the school near Rennebaum Park, it is a tier 1 as well. And then obviously here for Thoreau Elementary, the Marlborough area and this area sort of north is, but that also wouldn't be serviced by this particular crossing guard that we studied this time. So some recommendations, and as you can see on the sheet, we do recommend discontinuation for all of the ones that we studied. They don't meet our policy. We do have some improvements that we're recommending, and I will talk about those in a little bit more. We are not recommending, and I think Seagull at Richland is a hard one because their hazard rating is very high with that 88-foot crossing. So we do have a recommendation for an infrastructure change. And then I think for both Mineral Point at Midvale and Seagull at Richland, there could be additional improvements in the future after a more further review, because I think those streets could be changed to be more ped bike friendly, generally speaking. But right now we just have a couple smaller improvements that we're recommending. So I think at Raymond at Leland, although we're not recommending a permanent guard, we would recommend, if we can hire someone to work there, and that has been a challenge, that we do a 1-year trial and continue to review it. And then we would continue to review the ones on Shave at Old Sock Hope Farm as more housing is built, and things will definitely be changing. There's a lot of lots for sale and things happening out that way that could potentially impact the crossing guard study. And then we would just say that we're going to undertake hopefully some safe routes to school planning. We're going to be forwarding a resolution of support for a grant to undertake some planning work, which could lead to a more thorough review of schools, traffic safety, and their crossing guard placement. And then here are just a couple of proposed things that we could fund through Safe Streets Madison that would not completely address the hazard rating, but would provide some more improvements in the location at Seagull and Richland, which would be a pedestrian refuge island to turn it into, to have that safer 2-stage crossing, and then some changes at Mineral Point and Midvale to mark a continental crosswalk and change the signs to no turn on red. Currently, they are no turn on red when a crossing guard is present, and if we never have one, I think that would match the other parts of the intersection. All right, so I wanted to be done by 5:30, so I will stop.
Well, we're at 5:23, and we would normally go to public comment before we started our discussion, but Alder Tischler is here and wished to speak before he has to leave for another meeting. So why don't we go ahead and, if there's no objection, hear from Alder Tischler.
Yeah, I want to thank the committee for letting me having an opportunity to talk here. I am product of the Madison School District. Actually, I was a crossing guard. I went to Hoyt School. I was a crossing guard fifth grade. I did attend Van Nuys for elementary school, and I have 3 kids that live in the neighborhood. And for full disclosure, I do have a son who will be going to Hamilton this coming fall. I'm just concerned. I've been hearing from a lot of other parents here in the district about concerns about the Seagull and Richland crossing area. I'm willing to accept, and I understand that we can't, that Mineral Point and Midvale, adding a crossing guard, is probably an uphill battle that will not be successful. I mean, as a parent, I don't want my kids crossing on that intersection, and I don't even like crossing it even on a good day. There are other options that kids can take when they're going from the from the Midvale Heights and the Westmoreland neighborhood when they're going to Van Hise. But I am concerned about once kids do get to that intersection, especially since it is a bus route as well, and we're only going to be seeing more increased amount of traffic. Also, when we do reduce the speed limit in other parts of the neighborhoods, one can argue that it could be driving up speeds, and I'm concerned about that. I know we are only factoring in for elementary, but we have to recognize that there is middle school there as well. I have I have two older kids that were in middle school at once. They sometimes don't make the best choices crossing the street. So I think we need to factor in those kids crossing the street as well. Again, I'm just asking to reconsider the recommendation and to actually have a crossing guard in that spot. If we find that there's absolutely no way we can do this due to budget, I'm willing to work with any alters in this committee to find ways to make that intersection safer. And I guess that's why I joined you, and I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
So Renee, do you have any comments back to the alder before he has to leave?
No, I mean, obviously, I think that Mineral Point and Midvale, we need to look at it in a more thorough way. Just having a crossing guard for an hour isn't really going to change the dynamics of that intersection, which is long. There's a lot of traffic. So I think that is a project that needs to have a closer look. But I do think that having a crossing guard there is probably not the solution. The solution is much bigger than that. So.
And then how about Seagull at Richland? Because I know, Alder, that was one where you were hoping to see one added.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is probably one of the tougher choices on the docket, right? It's an 88-foot crossing right now. It takes a 29-second gap. Most people in motor vehicles are treating it as, like they're like not yielding in the way you would ideally want them to. Right now the speed limit out there is 30. It's obviously we are reducing that. So I think it's one of the tougher choices is what to do with that crossing, knowing that also is a street where I think in the future there's going to be opportunities to relook at that. The northern part of Seagull is on the docket for an engineering project, and so we'll be talking about that design. And I only suggested a very small infrastructure change, thinking that we would not want to put something in and rip it back out because we want to kind of redo that street to match what happens in the northern section. But, definitely understandable why parents feel that a crossing guard would be merited in that location. So I think probably the toughest one of the night to decide. But it doesn't quite meet our policy, but you could definitely say if there was a crossing guard, perhaps that number of 13 or 15 students would go up. But then I think if we change the road and the hazard rating goes down, what does that mean, right? Does that mean that we would permanently have the crossing guard there? Would we want to restudy it? So I think just some things for everyone to ponder and give some feedback to us on as well.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you could join us, Alder, and have an opportunity to offer your comments in that regard. Renee, did you have other presentation? Otherwise, we'll go to public comment if you don't.
No, I think I did it very fast, so I apologize to everyone.
That's okay. We can come back to questions and we can pull your presentation back up and maybe look at your recommendations once we get there.
Yeah.
So we do have someone, I understand, Aiden, registered to speak.
We do.
Alder Miazzi, could we wait for discussion until after we hear from the registrant, or did you have a point of order? Or?
Oh, no. That's sorry about that. I'm pretty quick on the hand raising. Sorry about that.
That's okay. If I would just love to hear from the public before we start the discussion, would be our normal, and then we can come back to you, Alder.
All right. So first is Andrea Pierce of Gregg Road, Madison, Wisconsin, opposes and wishes to speak.
We do have an Andrea on the list, different last name, but we'll unmute. And
Yes, I'm Andrea Wiltsius Pierce. Am I on?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Hello, Renee. I am a parent. I live behind Van Nuys Elementary. I'd like to speak to that 50 hazard rating that we're discussing right now. I have been walking my child to that school, and I believe that rating is going to increase. Congratulations to the city on the largest development of the Madison Yards that we've ever had. Can't wait for those 450 residential apartments to come in, and then the Westgate 464 multifamily units over on Whitney Way. Right now, we're being super pigeonholed by all that development. We're seeing increased traffic because of that. When Whitney Way was reduced to 25 miles an hour, we saw an increase of traffic on Seagull because of that, a lot of angry traffic. So that hazard rating, that was big. That was really, really big. And to get our kindergartners and first graders across that street, it was hazardous, super, super hazardous. So it's pressing. And I think, in this upcoming year, as these developments really come to life, I think it's going to increase. And I noticed that Middleton Shway Road or whatever didn't have that risk rating, but they had enough kids, but they got their crossing guard. So I'm really asking if there's any possible way, because we have the risk rating, but we don't have the right amount of kids, if there's any way you guys could reconsider getting us a crossing guard for next year. I don't think it's the ultimate answer. I do think the other mitigation factors that we talked about, bumping out the bike lanes and things like that, because people are passing the bike lanes, so it becomes a 4-lane road, because people remember Seagull Road is a 4-lane road. They're almost hitting kids in that lane. Making that a bigger island in the middle. There's other things we can do, but those take a lot of time. We need help. Somebody's going to get hurt. So if there's anything you guys can do, we really need help over here. So anything you guys can do to help, we're begging for it over here. So please help us. Thank you.
Does anyone on the commission have a question for the registrant? Okay, seeing no hands. Did we have anybody else registered to speak in?
There is Sarah Carls of Robin Circle, Madison, Wisconsin, opposes and wishes to speak. I don't see them in the registrants list right now, though.
Yeah, they're not here.
Okay, well, you want to let us know if Sarah does show up and just maybe wave your hand or something, Aiden or Joe, break in and let us know, and we'll hear from them as well. Okay, let's Alder Miyagi, you had your hand up earlier. Do you want to go ahead and make your comment or ask your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Renee. I guess one of the concerns was, I guess you said that there hasn't been a ResJ analysis done yet.
There wasn't a full ResJ analysis done to the crossing guard, so I just tried to provide, some basic information that you would typically see in a ResJ analysis regarding impacts and regarding, just the demographics of the neighborhood that would be involved in these different decisions.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand, how does that protocol go where is that something that's supposed to be done at the beginning of a project as far as a ResJ analysis or?
We have Tara here. So what do you want to go ahead and help us out here, Tara?
Yeah. Thanks for the letting me pop in. I don't know how you all do it, but there we go. I think one of the things that we're trying to do with the racial equity analysis is certainly we want them to be done. But we also want the principles of racial equity analysis to be embedded into everything that we do really proactively. And so sometimes that's going to mean, as we're looking at different projects or processes, like really thinking through each part along the way, like, yes, what are the unintended consequences here? Is this particular stop going to work for this community? Is it not going to work for this community? How do we weight different pieces? So I know that there's been elements, I can't remember, Renee and Yang, if you did a full racial equity analysis on the process at one point, but the idea wouldn't be necessarily to do a racial equity analysis every year as kind of a process has gone through, but rather that process itself is really racially equitable and socially just and inclusive, so that it's really, really getting baked into each step along the way, as opposed to an after the fact, well, how did we do?
I think it's important as we start looking at, the resident made a very valid point. As we start to think about all developments that are going up, when we start thinking about kids, when we start thinking about the reason why they probably have 25 miles an hour is because of safety measures, right? I think it's important that I believe transportation, I guess, Renee, you could answer is best for me. Does transportation have its own equity team that actually looks at things from an equity point versus even using a racial analysis study?
So maybe I will let Yang talk a little bit about our department's overarching work. Yeah, I think that might be more appropriate.
Go ahead, Yang.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Alder Miyazi. Yes, so we do have a departmental equity team. Actually, we have a joint team between traffic engineering and the parking division. That so the team does look into things we do and make recommendations for equity considerations.
Okay, I guess my thing is that this is a process, right? I like to think about how a process is done so that we alleviate the possibility of this safety measure that the resident was talking about that the already been chimed in on. So what processes can we do if you guys already have certain processes like equity team, Res J? So I think it's important that we make sure that these processes are if we need to help, as policymakers into these processes, I'm willing 100% to give my time and effort for that. But I just want to make sure that we give time to focus on these processes that must be followed in order to be equitable. And I guess the last thing, one of the things I wanted to chime in and ask, I guess, Renee or you, Dal, is that for cross guards, is it a volunteer position? And can we as alders be able to advertise that on our blog? Like, hey, anybody want to do cross guard? If training or whatever, in order for our district to be safe. I know that you're big on safety, so anything I can do to help. So if you can,
for sure. So it is not a volunteer position. It is a paid position, and you have to meet, the requirements of the job, and you have to be committed, to the attendance requirements as well. So, but we always, when we have openings in districts, we love when alders will publicize it, because hiring is an issue. It is not the most glamorous job because you work like a little bit in the morning and then you have to come back in the afternoon. So it kind of splits up your day, and you have to be willing to come out when it's really cold, when it's really wet, and when it's really hot. So we love it. We do have volunteer opportunities, definitely through our Safe Routes to School program for walking school buses, which are volunteer jobs where you offer to walk with the kids. You don't have the same sort of legal things that are around a crossing guard in terms of stopping traffic, but you are there to ensure that the kids get to school safely. So definitely we can, as we get going with that, as we approach the fall, definitely would love to have it out in the blog, because we need a lot more volunteers for that, to make it a really robust program throughout the school district.
Okay, so last comment I would like to say is that while we're thinking about this certain corridor, I think it's important to try to get on top of this beforehand, right? So even if we have somebody like this in their presence, this is huge, right? In order to walk kids across the street and make sure that that kids are safe. So I guess as you guys look at it within the next couple of weeks, a month, right before we get to the fall, let's be proactive and try. I suggest that we be proactive in trying to make sure that we hit these measures before school, way before school starts. So we already have people aligned already. A lot of people care about their community. I'm sure we'll have a lot of people turn out. So that's just my suggestion. And if there's anything, like I said, us alders can do as policymakers to ensure, get the word out, talk to our schools. I have surrounded by 2 elementary and 2 middle schools. So yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Huntington, can you go ahead?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very interesting conversation, and thank you, the alders, for bringing it forward. Since we do have Tarek and also Renee on the call, Renee, when we look at the term rescue and we talk about the racial equity analysis, is there anything that's missing in how this application goes forward that we should be looking at? Have you noticed anything that we need to be more robust in, or something that's lacking? What would be your assessments of how effective this is in the work that you do?
So the policy itself, I think it was last reviewed in 2016, and I think not too many things were changed because overall people felt it was a pretty strong policy. I think, we see with the Orchard Ridge, Raymond, and Leland that it doesn't necessarily take into account a situation like this, because it's not scoring enough points and doesn't quite have enough kids. But we know that perhaps for equity reasons, we may want to consider that crossing guard anyway. And that really isn't necessarily built into the policy and is something that just needs to be brought forward outside of it. So I don't know, Tarek, if you have other thoughts.
I think the other piece would just be the ways in which, and Yang, I know you can speak to this, but the ways in which that you all have prioritized the areas with NRTs and other areas with similar demographics. So recognizing that these are spots where we know that there are a variety of different issues and especially just lack of access to kind of systems of power. But that's where I think historically you all have elevated requests that have come from areas with NRTs, whether it comes from the NRT itself or from community. I think that's right.
Yeah, and I think I would just add, through this proposed Safe Routes to School planning project, our idea is to kind of use these racial equity, social justice to do these more in-depth looks, because I feel like, we haven't had the opportunity to dive more deep into traffic safety at schools. We've done some work, particularly with the community schools, but I think it's an opportunity to kind of elevate that work.
Alder Harrington, your hand went down and went back up again, but I think you still have the floor if you want to continue on. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question, and my question then goes to Yang. Is there a systematic ranking in terms of when you're looking at the NRT and you're looking at the needs and the needs for school crossings? Is there a ranking? How do you evaluate where the priorities are, and how are we making sure that we're looking at where those priorities are and they take precedence over one area or the other? And I'm just trying to get us a sense of how do you look at these areas and how you make those determinations of where the need is. And then I'm complete after this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, thank you for a great question, Alder Harrington McKinney. I will ask Renee to talk specifically about the crossing guard assignment, but I will talk a little bit about how we generally for our agency, how we handle different requests. We actually it has been an effort of us in the last few years, trying to improve equity of our programs. And you are absolutely right. And also Tarek mentioned that there's definitely has been a barrier for our underserved communities to access our government resources. In traffic engineering, we have seen that we got lots of requests throughout every year for improvements in the city. But if you look at the distribution, those seldomly come from some neighborhoods, such as NRT areas. So we have been redesign our program, and for a couple of things. One is actually going out to neighborhoods, partnering with NRTs and with Tarek and other NRT leaders. Actually goes out to neighborhood and be engaged with them. With the help of NRT, actually, trying to hear from our residents on what they need and how can we help them. Once we got this request, we also have been designing our mechanism to prioritize these projects. For example, for our previous pedestrian bicycle improvements project, we introduced the equity factor in it, in addition to safety considerations, operation considerations. We put more weight into the requests from the NRT areas. We're understanding that kind of regard to the various kind of power structure that historically being created. So we actually had quite a success of doing the program much more adequately. If you look at our program for the last couple of years, you will see much better, more equitable distributions. One example that I always use is for one crossing at Dutch Mill on Dutch Mill Road serves a bus stop and a trailer park. Where kids go to the bus stops to catch the bus. There was no crosswalk mark. There's no median. There's no any other improvements to help pedestrians cross. It has been there for many years, and we actually know it's a problem. But our resources always being put towards where the strongest voices are. Through the changes, we actually were able to do something over there, and it really helped those kids living in this low-income housing, help them cross the street. That's just one example. So I've been, really trying promoting, the real concept of equity across our programs. But I'll ask Renee to talk more about the crossing guard program specifically.
Sure. So our crossing guard program is obviously there are a lot of players, and we work particularly close with the MMSD, and they play an important role in, highlighting places for studies, having discussions about potential discontinuation. And then, as I mentioned, we're very active right now, and we have done some school site visits together, but we want to come up with a shared metric around prioritizing schools for more in-depth traffic safety planning, which would include reviewing hazardous busing, locations for improvements, looking at the crossing guards for, where should they be, and really try to dig into sort of making sure that we're doing it with that racial equity, social justice lens, but in a way that both MMSD, the Wisconsin Bike Fed Safe Routes to School program and the city are all sort of working together collaboratively to make our schools the safest possible, but with ensuring that we're focusing on where the need is the greatest. So I think we're really just at the tip of starting that work and really engaging in this in a very thorough way, because I think there's a ton more work to do in reviewing where those locations are and are not, and how that has historically been requested to get to a place where we feel really that we're staffing the places that are going to make the most difference.
And maybe I also want to add that now the Safe Route to School program is part of the Safe Streets Medicine program, thanks to the good work of the joint subcommittee by this commission and the TPBB. One of the major changes actually we made was that we eliminated the petition process for traffic calming requests, with understanding that some neighborhoods have much better resources to get organized and get signatures. Other neighborhoods they're struggling, and it's much harder for them actually to get organized and get those signatures. So we actually removed that step along with a new process for Safe Streets Medicine program. So thanks for a commission for that.
Okay, Alder Harrington McKinney, is that all you had then?
I just popped up again. And so as we're talking about budgeting, I mean, is it, and when you're looking at, and I understand that resources are limited and very challenging, is the budget a constraint for communities that don't have, are not able to actively engage as strongly as some communities are? And is that alignment in terms of the budget assessment? Is that limited, or is that something that constricts you also? And then I promise you that's my final question.
I would let Yang actually answer the budgetary question. I would say we definitely have the constraints of being able to hire. And that has been a constraint it's always been an issue, but since the pandemic, people have a lot more choices in what they do. So that is a constriction. We hire many times a year and try to get everything that we needed. I'll let Yang take the money question.
Sure. Yeah. We definitely facing a very tight, budget limitations on our program. We actually won probably the most contacted city agencies by our citizens, for requests, for complaints, and for help for solving their traffic problems. A lot of times, the concerns are definitely valid, but we definitely don't have enough resources to accommodate all of them. And oftentimes I have to face very difficult decision on, what to do, what not to do.
Okay, thanks. Denise, you're next. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Anne. I have 3 questions, so I'll do them separately. One is related to the conversation we're having now about criteria for these decisions. So, I was thinking about the Orchard Ridge area and, the assumption I'm making, and I think, Renee, you validated it, is that some of these kids will be walking on their own or with siblings and may not have a parent or a guardian accompanying them. Especially if they're single family or parents are out working during school times. So, curious about how that gets factored into decision making, that aspect of the demographic of the neighborhood. And then thinking about the age range of the kids attending the school. So Van Nuys has got K through 5, so got little ones, and I think they have a 4K program, so very little ones. And thinking about those tiny people trying to cross an 88-foot crossing makes my head want to just spin off. So yeah, first question, how are those kind of demographics factored into decision making?
Sure. So, our policy doesn't sort of differentiate between the kids, and which you'll note on the sheets at Orchard Ridge, we just try to put it in the notes. Those kids, not shockingly, were particularly, they were crossing by themselves more than with an adult. Whereas other ones, we try to note if most of them were with an adult, because I think, it can help if something is kind of near the policy and you're trying to decide if it should be approved or not approved, that it can be really helpful to know that difference. But it isn't a metric within the policy itself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe as we're evaluating the policies that we could include some of those demographic things that are really going to impact safety for the kids crossing. And then my other question, and I think I can lump these two together, is when is the Seagull Road project slated to move forward? And could we, has the idea been proposed of a 1-year crossing guard at Seagull and at this intersection, similar to what we did with Pope Farm? And I know once you start a crossing guard, it's much harder to take it away. But if that was in conjunction with the road redevelopment, maybe we could find the sweet spot with that. So that's all of my questions.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And so currently this portion of Seagull Road isn't necessarily scheduled for any work, but the northern section north of Regent is. And I think, and Yang can probably speak to this better, it feels like that would be an opportunity to, as we work on the design for that northern section, program through Safe Streets or some other funding, something that would then also match that in this section. And so I don't know, Yang is probably better qualified to speak to that.
Thank you, Renee. Yeah, I couldn't remember on top of my head which year it's slated for. But yeah, we have been thinking about making improvements such as adding much better bicycle facilities and making the roadway feels narrower, and we're going to remove some of the parking to do that. And actually, we really would love to kind of narrow road, especially at the intersections, create some bump outs. So those are some things that we are looking into. So we do think this will have an impact on traffic on Seagull, especially on speed. But I think the resident previously speak about challenges here, right? Definitely, it's going to be challenges. With the large amount of developments happening around here. Definitely going to be bring challenges. We do have a plan to make improvements. But I will say, this area is going to be quite different. Both in terms of the amount of usage and also how streets, at least if we get our way, how the street's going to look like.
Yeah, and I forgot to talk about the like having a temporary or a pilot, and I think that's definitely something that has happened in the past and is on the table. But as Denise mentioned, that has its own challenges, right? From like, what if you decide that it is just temporary, and the challenges that can come with that as well. So, just balancing that, but is something that I think is definitely on the table. And I would always add, as we can fill the position, and I think the neighborhood and the Alder obviously will be resources to help get the word out, because a lot of times people most interested live nearby.
Is that all you had then, Denise? Okay, great. Pat, go ahead. You're muted, Pat.
You were talking about Midvale, and I live at the corner of Midvale and Cherokee. So I've seen a lot of stuff going on there. When the RRFB was put in, that did help. But now that people are going back to work after the pandemic, sort of. The traffic is horrible. I see cars going through the flashing lights. They come off the belt line at a high rate of speed and they don't stop, or they are on their phone and don't see the flashing lights. There's a lot of near accidents there. The kids that use that crosswalk, it's from Midvale to the West Belt Line. It's called Summit Woods. And I believe that the demographics are changing there. The neighborhood was an older neighborhood, but we're either moving out or going somewhere else. And it seems that we have a lot more families with young kids. So I think the hazard rating would be very great for that area. And I just want you to think about that for maybe a future study.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that the neighbors, in talking about the changes to that area, did mention that to the principal. And I, recommended that he think about that. He look at his demographics, and if he feels that's appropriate, that he make that request for that study. And I feel like he will, because it does seem like there is a lot of change happening and more families there.
Well, and it's also that you get to Thoreau first, but then you go down the street farther and you get to the elementary school. So we have two sets of kids that are trying to cross there. And I see more and more people driving their kids down to Cherokee because of their concern. So just wanted to say that.
Yang, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Yeah, I just want to kind of provide some information on that. Actually, I just had some email communication with Alder Figueroa Cole on this intersection this past weekend. And we got a complaint from a resident saying that he loves the neighborhood, trying to walk around, and but drivers are not yielding to him, and he's a little baby, he's pushing. And also for this one incident, the driver even kind of yelled at them. So that's kind of frightening. We know we have problems over there. And actually, I also talked to my colleagues with MPD on that, asking there for help for more enforcement too. Actually, I don't believe we right now we have the RFB over there. We just have the conventional flashing beacons. That's kind of regular balls instead of the police car pattern. If we haven't done that, right, Renee, that's on our list, but I haven't got to that. Have done that yet. Okay, yeah, but we do want to kind of look into upgrade that to the newer style. That will help probably help improve the compliance. But it also comes with a price. So right now with the regular, because the regular flashing beacons, we can do a hybrid operation, which means we can bring the beacons up automatically during school crossing hours. So people don't need to push a button. It's going to come on automatically at certain times during the day. And the rest of the time of day, when there's less pedestrians, it works by actuation, which means the pedestrian push a button, you can bring it up. But when the RFB was approved by the federal government recently, they only limit its use for actuation operation. So you cannot bring them up automatically during school working hours. So pedestrian has to push a button. So that's a kind of federal regulation that we cannot violate. So that's one downside. But that may change. So we'll see. So, but we're still evaluating whether we want to do the upgrade. Over the years, we made the improvements. We installed all the signs that's appropriate. We marked the continental crosswalks over there. But that's not going to be enough to solve the problem. As I was explaining to Alder Figueroa Cole this weekend, the street is set up. I think for problems, as you all know, that Vanderbilt connects to two freeways. It connects to Verona Road. Now it's kind of freeway. It connects to Beltline. People driving very fast on freeways, and then they come to Midvale. it's really hard for them to feel the difference, for them to slow down. So I think, for things to be significantly different, we really need to change how the street feels like dramatically. And that's something that, definitely has been on our mind. We want to make the street narrower. We want to get rid of the largely unused on-street parking, which makes the streets, feels much wetter. And we want to provide, better accommodations for pedestrians and bicyclists over there. So of course, that's going to be, some huge changes coming. Requires a larger project, and I think many people will like it. Many people will probably be opposing it. So I think really that's going to offer much better solution, and we'll keep working on it.
Okay, thank you, Yang. Is that all you had then, Pat?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Bill, go ahead.
Thank you, Ann. I would like to make two comments. One is regarding the speaker's comments about something that she said that very resonated with me very much, and that was our drivers today. And as we move into this era of safer streets, and we narrow our streets for buffered bike lanes and so forth, and I completely agree with those. But our drivers don't understand that concept. They recognize it was a 4-lane street. And this is not just on Seagull, but it is. I don't drive that often on Seagull, but I have. So I have not seen the violations, but like the speaker has addressed, but I'm sure they occur. But where I have seen these violations are streets where we've gone, such as Odana and Schrader, where we've gone down to 1 lane and have a center lane for making left turns and so forth. That is being violated every day. And I think as we see in making these changes, our drivers just don't get it. And I'm sorry that Lieutenant Fiore is not here today, but I'm sure and he's going to recognize this and understands this, that, they would love to do more enforcement on these kinds of operations to show that we've got to educate our drivers that these are unacceptable types of maneuvers of driving in areas that are not designated for driving lanes. And at school zones is absolutely atrocious. We can't accept that. And so there's just we're using striping as the initial measures to reduce the width of these streets, and that's fine. And I think we can we have to do that, but we've got to get the message to the drivers, and I'm afraid that the only real tool left in the toolbox is enforcement to drivers that disobey that maneuver of going and driving in places that are not designated as driving lanes any longer. So I certainly agree with the speaker that's a challenge, and I definitely do not like to see this in school zones. I mean, it's bad enough when people pass on Odana and Schrader, but I think in a school zone, I think we maybe have to prioritize that with Lieutenant Fiore, especially when to do that. So that's a concern. I don't know whether I'd love to have a crossing guard there, but as far as criteria and so forth, I really have mixed emotions, because I think also I like the idea of maybe the criteria for to include in the criteria of families that don't have the opportunity to have an adult or a guardian with the children walking to school. So I don't know that whether that makes makes the changes in points, but I mean we're just reshuffling the chairs, if you will. So it's really which one comes out on top, if you will. So I think it's a very extremely challenging for all of us. But I think that's. And I think another point that I wanted to raise was that we have to think about these kinds of things as we do things like reducing speed limits on Whitney Way, that we're causing our impatient drivers to switch, to move. They find their shortcuts. If Seagull suddenly becomes more attractive to them as a shortcut, because they're used to driving on Whitney or Whitney Way is just unacceptable. So they and enforcement is done on those streets because their speeds are continuing to be high, and so some of the drivers are savvy to that, and they find new shortcuts. And Seagull should not be a shortcut, and that's a point that I certainly agree. It's a very big challenge. The last point I wanted to make, and it was something Yang just mentioned about the RRBs. Yang, I think there is the process of doing experiments to the manual and uniform traffic control devices. And I think that if that's not currently there, that I think that certainly would be, if the city is willing to do the evaluation component to take a look and see, to add that as an experiment to the manual to use the RFBs during school hours automatically. I think that would be something that maybe should be looked at is to conduct a research in that, get an experimental approval for that. So thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, Renee, I just had a question about the Midvale and Hammersley or Nakoma. I forget where it's listed at there. But what is there a process for monitoring that, or is it done now? And unless it's brought back up to somebody's attention, we won't pay attention to how many kids may or may not cross there.
So, in that instance, we would ask the principal to, reach back out if they feel that school attendance has shifted. We really studied that one because it was a great unknown at that apartment building. So for sure, we would want them to be in touch if they feel that they're seeing kids enrolling who are living in that location.
Okay. Personally, I know that, and anybody who's spent any other time on committees with me know that I have a burr under my saddle about Midvale and its colossal failure as a street design for people. Where I was almost hitting the crosswalk again this weekend. Somebody who decided they waited long enough at a red light and they were just going to go as they headed south on Midvale after coming to a complete stop while I was in the middle of the crosswalk. So that makes it about a half dozen times this year alone that I've almost been hit there. From impatient drivers. So I would hate to see that happen to kids. We rely on, let's signalize crossing, but impatient drivers are obviously don't care about signals. So thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Alder Miadzi, go ahead.
Yeah, I won't be too long. I just have two suggestions, and I probably could talk offline to Yang and Renee about this. I think it's important, definitely, to try to start thinking about strategic ways, right? One thing, so the first thing I was going to bring up is that alders really, my experience since being alder for a year, over a year, is that MSD has their own policies and policies that they make, right? So we really, as alders, don't really get a chance really to sit at the table, right, when MSD is talking of transportation. So I think that it's important with all the development, with everything going on in our neighborhood, we should really start having a comprehensive meeting. I don't care if it's once a month or whenever MSD sits down at the table with transportation in order to come up with safety measures and really because we're the voice of the people, right? We hear our constituents and we advocate for them. So it's important to actually think about ways we can sit at the table with you guys when you guys are talking. Second thing, in reference to thinking about other strategic moves as a policymaker, in Illinois, you see how they have cameras all the time. I think we need to start really thinking about, as a policymaker, how do we get that in Madison where we start making people accountable for speeding, rather than like having cameras for on the poles like they have in Illinois. So we could talk about that offline, but those two things I want to definitely discuss with both of you guys offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to move that we accept the staff recommendations.
Okay, I think Alder Miazzi, your hand is still up. Did you have more conversation? Okay.
No, thank you.
Okay, so there's a motion that we move the staff recommendations. Chris, is that a second?
Yep.
Okay, so we'll open it up for discussion. Robbie, did you want to speak to your motion?
Not necessarily. I think that everything that needed to be said has been said, except to say that I've been through the discussion about crossing guards many, many times, and it's a difficult one. And often the people who most need help with their kids getting to school because they don't have other options are not heard from because they either don't attend or don't have time to speak to us. So I think looking at places where parents are not driving is probably important, but I think that the staff is probably doing a very good job of deciding where crossing guards are appropriate. And I know that it's a difficult decision. I know it's a difficult decision because I've been through a lot of these meetings before. So that's all I was going to say.
Okay. Is there further discussion? I do have a couple of a comment and a question, but I'll wait to see if anybody else does, since our special rule is that I have to wait to be the last one to ask. So I want to make sure that everybody else has their chance first. Okay, I'm going to, well, first I have a question about one of the recommendations, and I'll ask that first, and then I'll make a comment about the criteria. When we look at Seagull at Richland, with the high hazard rating of 49 and 50, that really concerns me, the safety issue. And I'm wondering, Renee, if it would be possible to consider, as was suggested, I think, a couple of times, that we modify the staff recommendations to also have a one-year trial for that one as well. I mean, Raymond and Leland, the hazard ratings were 29 and 26. But there were other factors that certainly supported, and I support having a trial crossing guard in that location, which is what you recommended. But I see the safety issues with regard to Seagull at Richland, but I also understand that having a pedestrian refuge might help that situation as well. So I'm just wondering about the feasibility of having a recommendation for a trial crossing guard there for a year, just to see if you can fill out if that would help make it safer. Because I heard a lot of concern from people about the safety there.
Sure. And we definitely could, that could be a recommendation, that is approved tonight, is to have a trial one. So definitely is an option, and that's on the table. I would say that, the reason it has a higher hazard rating is because Raymond does have that pedestrian refuge. So the crossing distance is very long, but it's considered a 2-stage crossing.
Sure.
And without that pedestrian refuge, you have to have a gap of the full 29 seconds for the crossing. So that kind of plays into the difference in that rating. But I think if this committee feels like, because obviously putting in that pedestrian refuge is not going to, it's going to have to get into a contract. So even if we did that, it's not something that can happen immediately. So if the committee felt like that with that high hazard rating currently, that's what they want to recommend, I certainly, I just made the recommendation I did because there is a real equity issue that is at Raymond and Leland.
and I appreciate that. I do, and I support that. I do. And then two people have their hands up, but if I can just finish my other thought, and that was, Renee, to get your thoughts about doing racial equity and social justice analysis over the course of the next year and look at the criterion, because there isn't an equity criteria included currently. And I'm wondering if maybe you could work with Tarek and do something over the course of the next year to see about that. So I'll just throw that out as something to consider and get your thoughts. And other people are raising their hands, and we'll see what other people's thoughts are on that as well. So,
I mean, I would just say, yeah, it's been, I guess, 6 years since the policy was last reviewed for any changes. And I think looking at it with that racial equity, social justice lens is definitely worthwhile and could change the policy and the way these rankings are done. So definitely a good suggestion.
Okay, great. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. My first question, I think, Renee, you just answered, actually. It was on Seagull and Richland. It looks like 32 of the points are coming from that crossing, that gap availability at the crossing distance. So that would be much different if the median were there. So then I guess a follow-up question is, if we were to make a recommendation of some trial crossing guard there, I assume we would have to pull that from something else. We can't just right.
So we would, Alex, because he's the West Side Crossing Guard manager, would attempt to fill that position. And obviously, if the pilot went away, it's not like we would have to fire someone. We always have retirements and people who leave for other reasons. So we would, and current guards would have the opportunity to say that's their preferred location. I guess, did I miss anything, Alex? I mean, but we would try to fill it.
Alex, did you have a comment? Go ahead.
No, that's kind of how the process works. The existing guards would get bid on it. The worry would then be, if it was discontinued, that throws into a domino effect. But yeah, if it's approved, we try to fill it, and we'll just add it to the list.
So, Chris, what are your thoughts about adding that, or are you thinking that the pedestrian island would take the hazard rating down so that it would make it safer?
I guess I'm leaning towards, I'm reluctant to say that we should recommend it, because just for the sake of it, I think it sounds like it's a more complicated decision than that.
Okay, thanks. Alder Miazzi, go ahead.
I was going to do the exact opposite. Actually, I was going to recommend it. Due to the safety aspect of it. So I would recommend it based on what I've all heard about safety. Safety is our number one concerns. I mean, people are not really thinking about when this BRT comes out, people crossing the road, because if you guys look at the structure of the BRT, it's in the middle of the island. They have to literally cross the street. So this is, I mean, if we don't get a handle on some of these safety corridors that the BRT is going to be going down, we're in a much we're going to be in a more strenuous times. So I'm actually recommending it. So however that picture looks like.
Are you making a motion for a substitute motion? The recommendations adding a trial crossing guard at Seagull and Richland, is that what you would suggest?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a motion for a substitute, which would recommend all of the recommendations plus the trial crossing guard at Seagull and Richland. Is there a second to that motion? Bill?
I will second, so it's a vote just to show what the census is of the.
Okay, and I think Steve is still. Steve Bristow, you still on? I think we have to vote on whether we want to go with the substitute, and then we actually vote on the motion. Would that be correct? So there'd be 2 votes. Would that be right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. All right. So we have. There's been a substitute, a motion for a substitute to approve all the recommendations, which approves the eliminations and the additions and the Safe Streets Madison improvements, plus a temporary 1-year temporary crossing guard at Seagull and Richland if it can be filled. So with regard to the substitute, I will assume a unanimous consent vote unless people are opposed. I believe there are some people who are opposed, so perhaps it might be easier just to do a roll call vote since, why don't we just go ahead and do a roll call vote? Aiden?
Sure thing. Charles Miazzi.
Aye.
Barbara Harrington McKinney.
Aye.
Chris McCahill.
Can you come back to me?
Sure. Denise Jess.
Aye.
Robbie Weber.
Aye.
Patricia Bennett.
Aye.
Bridget Brown.
Aye.
Bill Bremer.
Aye.
Chris McCahill.
Aye.
So 8 ayes.
Are we missing someone?
Nope.
Did Pat, did you vote? I'm sorry. Okay. All right, because I think we have 9 here, don't we? 2, 3. Oh, and I don't get to vote. Never mind. Yes, I can't count myself, can I? There we go. All right, so the substitute is what's on the table now. So now we vote on the actual motion, which is to eliminate the 4 crossing guards, that positions that Renee recommended, add temporary crossing guard at Raymond and Leland and Seagull at Richland, not add the other 3, and then approve the $11,500 for the 2 projects at Seagull or Richland and Monroe Point at Midvale. Robbie?
Well, I was just going to say, point of order that if it was a substitute, then that was the motion. But if it was an amendment to the original, then we have to vote on the motion, as opposed to, if it was a substitute, that would have been the motion, and we wouldn't have to vote again.
Steve?
A substitute is a form of an amendment. How I interpret Robert's Rules of Order is if there's a substitute proposed, it replaces everything in the original. And then that becomes the main motion. And then the main motion to be considered by the body is to adopt what was the substitute, which is now the main motion.
We only voted on the main motion if the substitute failed. Like it was a completely separate motion as opposed to an amendment.
Are you talking about the council procedure?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm using Robert's Rules of Order. I don't know how you did it at the council.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Substitutes were treated special in the council rules.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
we have to follow Robert's rules, except when city overrules that, right, Steve?
I apologize. I thought that was Robert's rules. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So now we'll move on.
Point of order.
Yes.
And could you repeat the what we're approving tonight? The actual.
Sure.
Because
Sure.
I heard something different, and I just want to make sure I understand exactly which items are being approved.
Okay. It's my understanding that we are approving the staff recommendations plus a 1-year trial crossing guard at Seagull and Richland, which we were adding. And staff's recommendations, I was just summarizing, which was to eliminate the 4 crossing guards at Atwood and Division, Buckeye and Droster, Monroe Point, and Midvale, and Glenway and Monroe. Add the temporary trial crossing guard at Raymond and Leland, and then not add the 3 at Midvale, Nakoma. How do you say that? Shave, I guess. Shave at Old Sauk and Shave at River Branch. And then to also approve the 2 Safe Streets Madison improvements, Seagull at Richland of $8,000 and Monroe Point at Midvale of $3,500 for a total of $11,500.
Thank you. That answered my question. Yep.
Okay. That's why I write all this stuff down so I can keep track of it. Okay, so our main motion is to approve everything I just said. And we'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or ask for a roll call vote. Alder Miadzi?
If I could add something to that, to be something just easy and simple, the part that talked about eliminating cross guards at certain locations, if we could just add that, I would like for staff to do that volunteer we have, I forget what it's called again, but when we volunteer to have people help.
A walking school bus?
Yes, because of volunteer positions, right? Can I add that in there?
Steve?
You're going to be amending the main motion to do that. You can do that by unanimous consent if there was no objection, or Alder Miadzi could just make the motion and then somebody could second the motion and you could vote on the amendment and then vote on the main motion.
All right.
Okay, so
but you might try unanimous consent and see if there's an objection.
Okay.
So is there any objection to adding the recommendation that staff promote the walking school bus program at the locations where the crossing guard is being eliminated? Robbie, you had your hand up?
So I only object because this is a program that staff is already working on with an outside body, and they will be doing that. But I think that it's complicating the motion to recommend that it happen now, because they are going to be doing a full city, I think, push. I would like to hear from Renee on this, because I think that she's going to be heading this up, and trying to add it into this motion, I think, is overly complicated since it's a separate program.
So our walking school bus program is actually overseen by the Wisconsin Bike Fed Safe Routes to School program, but in collaboration with city staff here at Traffic Engineering. So we definitely work closely with them on the walking school bus program. And our push has been to kind of revitalize it after the pandemic, because many of our walking school buses have closed and our volunteers have not come back. But we definitely recruit at all the schools. And so we can definitely add these schools, but it is definitely a joint program. And it is a challenging program to get these walking school buses off the ground. So, but happy to recruit at these schools for families who would have used these crossings.
And I guess, Renee, having a volunteer position is not really that much to ask for, especially in what we're talking about, safety. If anybody comes out, that's a plus for.
Yeah, we'll take anyone. I mean, who can pass the background check? Anyone who can do that.
So I'm not trying to complicate this any further. Basically, I'm just trying to think about all safety measures, and this is just a simple ask. So hopefully my colleagues will understand that I'm just trying to move the city forward as far as something, a quick ask for, I don't think, is it a lot to do this, Renee, or do you think?
I mean, it's not a lot to ask for volunteers. Obviously, once we get volunteers, there's some logistics to getting this going. It's kind of a complicated little thing, hence why it is a little bit hard to really get them going and keep them going. But we would love to have more volunteers and have that problem of getting them going.
But this is something that you said that you're going to implement so this is a perfect time, right?
Oh, yeah, we already are implementing them. The MMSD is recruiting for volunteers. The Bike Fed has been recruiting. I mean, we've really been trying to get this back into action after our volunteers in the pandemic kind of fell off. So
thank you.
Let's see, Alder McKinney, you're next.
Yes. Thank you, Alder. What I'd like to see is for us to move forward with the clear distinction of the motion that was just put forward. And for you, Alder, if you would consider that, making a separate motion so that in essence, we are supporting the both of the programs, but there's a clear a separation of what we voted on and what we can build. I think I am so very supportive of the of what you're proposing, but I'd really like to see that divided. And even though we want to build a robust safety program for our students, I would still like to see those separated so that they can be evaluated independently. And so if you would consider making a motion and for that commitment, but I'd like to see those not rolled in together, but to have the first vote that we took, let's solidify that one and then come back and do the second one that you're proposing, Alder, if you would consider that. That's what I would like to see.
Well, Steve suggested that we need a unanimous consent, and Robbie, you objected, and Alder Harrington McKinney, you objected. So that means we don't have unanimous consent.
And we do not have a second on the amendment anyway. So what I would suggest, this is not a motion, but this is a suggestion, is that we actually have a presentation on the walking school bus so that everyone understands what it is, have it as a separate agenda item, and then if we need to make any kind of motions, we can do so at that time, because it is not necessarily a simple program. And I think asking for volunteers is fantastic, but let's not complicate what's on the agenda versus what's not on the agenda and is a program being run by an outside party.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's relevant to what we're talking about, because we're talking about getting kids safely across the street. And that's certainly an alternative. Alder Miadzi, how about if we ask Renee to come back, and I don't know if you could do it at the next meeting or, how soon you would be able to do it, so that we would just go with the original motion, because obviously there were people who objected to what you were suggesting, and there was no unanimous consent vote or a second to amend it, but interest in having the discussion as a separate agenda item. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah, that would be okay with me. I was just trying to suggest something as you taking away something to have something implemented while we're right here. But if everybody wants the next one, we can.
Yeah, no, and it's ironic. Actually, I just had seen a news story about a walking school bus program out in Virginia, and it was the first I'd heard about it. And then I learned that we had one here and talked with Renee about it. And so it's interesting that it came up this evening. So why don't we ask Renee to come back, and Alder Miadzi, you made some suggestions about working with the alders to try and get volunteers, Renee. So maybe that's something that could help support this walking school bus program. So it sounds like a good item, Aiden, to add to our topics for future agenda items when we get to that later on. So we're back to our main motion, which would you like me to repeat it again, or are we good with staff recommendations plus the addition of a one-year trial crossing guard at Seagull and Richland? Everybody okay with that summary of the motion? Okay, we'll assume a unanimous consent motion unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. If so, please raise your, or if you'd like a roll call vote, please raise your hand. Okay, so the motion is carried, and Renee will look forward to hearing more about the walking school bus.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much for all the work. You do a great job. Okay, as you may have heard earlier, unfortunately, Lieutenant Tony Fiore is ill this evening and not able to be here. So I would hope that we could, I would like to request a motion to refer this to the July 13th meeting. Chris?
Yes, move referral to the next meeting.
Okay, Robbie, is that a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no, abstain, or have a roll call vote. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, thanks so much. We'll move on to agenda item 5, TC practices of equity and inclusion. And we've already been talking a lot about equity and inclusion this evening. So we're just going to continue on with the discussion. And Tarek and Christy and Rebecca and Gretchen are here with us this evening, Tom Lynch and Yang, all who have been working on different programs related to equity and inclusion. So I'm going to start off with just some highlights on some recent efforts other than what we've already talked about this evening. And we've talked a lot about TC hoping to invite all relevant parties to the table, and not only invite them to the table, but make sure that they feel welcome and like they belong at the table when they get here. So that's really what we've been working on. And back in September of 2020, I looked back up at the date, and that was when at a joint meeting with the Transportation Policy and Planning Board, we all agreed that we wanted to have member training sessions on racial equity, bias, inclusion, and diversity. And over the course of the year, there was a draft RFP, quite a number of proposals, and we saw the RFPs at the Transportation Commission. And Urban Triage was selected to facilitate the 6 training sessions that we had from February through April of this year. And we'll talk about that training a little bit later on. In March of 2021, the joint TC-TPPB Traffic Calming Subcommittee met with Tarek and some other folks from Racial Equity and Social Justice, as we looked for input and technical assistance regarding application of those tools in our work developing the Safe Streets Madison program. So we spent a lot of time at every meeting talking about equity and valued Tarek's input in that effort. Then Tarek also helped us when we decided we wanted to better incorporate racial equity and social justice in our work. So we spent some time offline and then came together to TC in August of 2021, and we added to our work plan our commitment to include racial equity and social justice on a consistent basis, and said that we want to have this as an agenda item from time to time, and that's part of what we're doing here this evening. And along the way, we had some issues raised about accessibility of the Transportation Commission and the Transportation Commission material. So I've been meeting with some folks from Racial Equity and Social Justice with regard to accessibility, and we're going to have some conversations about that this evening. So we're here to provide you with some updates, and at this point, I want to turn it over to Christy Kumar from Racial Equity and Social Justice Division to talk a little bit about our group agreements and cultural norms for TC and how we can help with inclusion and equity. Christy, go ahead.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Christy Kumar. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I serve as the Equity and Social Justice Division Manager at the Department of Civil Rights. I'm really excited that this is not the first time, clearly, that you all are discussing racial equity and social justice components. This has been a part of your work and how you move through the work of this commission. So I've been asked to come and talk about something that's a bit different than situating racial equity and social justice in your policies, practices, and procedures. I'm here to talk about how we situate racial equity and social justice within how we are as a group together, as a commission, right? When you meet, how you belong with one another, essentially create a set of group agreements, which are essentially a set of communication practices and ways of being with one another to help you navigate harmful systems that inevitably show up here and within ourselves, even with our eye on positive change. So as we work to begin these work to build a more equitable, accessible, inclusive, anti-racist place of being, we kind of need agreements to help make sure we're on the right track, because we will go off track. Every meeting I've ever been in, there's probably something happening that we could probably pause and say, hey, how might we go back to our group agreements to make sure that we're really honoring them? So it's the idea that we do sometimes get out of alignment with our values. And so group agreements can help bring us back. And the notion of group agreements are really powerful because it wouldn't just be on Anne to say, hey, I have a sense that we're moving out of the group agreements. It's like on everyone to be like, hey, I think we should look back at our group agreements. How are folks feeling? So it's a collective accountability structure. So with all of that said, some of you might have been in meetings before where you've had group agreements. Because I know you had a jam-packed schedule, I come offering 5 that I have found very useful in my time facilitating conversations. And so I'll share those with the group and then ask what y'all think. And you might kind of add your own group agreements. And hopefully we can agree on a few to start with that you all might add to later in the future. Sound good? Okay, I'm going to get through the 5. The first one I have is make space, take space. So this means track the conversation. Have you shared a lot? If so, adjust accordingly. Try to think of making space for others, particularly those with lived experience around the content y'all are talking about. Be aware that folks take different time to process information. So for facilitators and others, really pause before you move on to make sure that folks have had space to share as they would like. So that's my make space, take space. A second one that I offer is practicing both self-care and community care. This means care for yourself and care for your neighbor. A good example of this is breaks. For some, breaks are absolutely a part of their self-care. Y'all are on it's been, an hour, 45 minutes. I'm sure meetings can go for a very long time. It can be a group agreement that, you practice self-care and ask for a break. And how does that situate within community care? If it doesn't actively detract from somebody else's wellness, even if it's not a preference for them, you might consider, really centering folks' needs and what they're naming around self-care. And it might be good for the collective as well. The third one I have here is assume best intent, attend to impact. All right, so this one is all about doing both of the things.
Say that again. Say it again.
I'll say it again. Assume best intent, or what's the comma? Attend to impact. Conflict in and of itself is not a bad thing. Harm is. So when conflict does arise, it can be helpful to orient around someone is doing their best. It's probably not with malintent, and it's having an impact on me. And that impact is valid, even if the intent to harm wasn't there. So essentially, what does that boil down to? Everyone's human and make mistakes. So how do we attend to the humanity and the mistake part? Right? And so it's not separating that humanity from the mistake. And it doesn't have to be intent over impact. We can actually do both. Number 4 of 5 is when the going gets rough, turn to wonder. So this is all about being honest and asking questions when you're feeling like disagreement. If you feel judgmental or defensive, you might ask yourself, I wonder what brought them to this belief. I wonder what they're feeling right now. I wonder what my reaction teaches me about myself. And so it's really just responding to others with honest, open questions instead of corrections and avoiding assumptions. The last one I've got for you is feedback is an offering. We cannot grow if we don't know. So one of the best ways to know how you're doing is through feedback. And from the feedbacker's giver's perspective, they're taking the time to observe, note, and share their thoughts with you. So they put time and effort, hopefully, into it. And it's not an easy thing to do to give someone feedback, let alone live in a commission meeting on camera. So as a feedback receiver, if it's coming with grace in the feedback, it's important to receive their efforts with the amount of grace that it was given to share with you and consider learning for next time. So those are 5 that I've put forth. I'm wondering if there's any questions or anything folks would want to add. You'll notice I did not use a group agreement of be respectful. I've never found that one quite useful because if tension starts to emerge, it can be really hard to be like, I just want to remind folks, be respectful. That means different things to different folks. There's too much to interpret there. I purposely have these kind of worded so that anyone hopefully can feel empowered to just say to the group, hey, I want us to consider turning to wonder right now. right? Like there's ways that you can word these when you're speaking into existence. So, and one of the things that's important about group agreements is not just saying them once, but writing them down and having them in reoccurring place for this group. Because it might take months for anyone to remember that this thing existed. And that we might want to go back there. So if it's visible, if it's sent out in materials, you can always come back to it. It's a living document.
So what I'm wondering, Christy, is it's a lot to think about. And my experience is we have a pretty visual group of people here. So I wonder if maybe we should write these up and have these as a topic on our next agenda. And if everybody agrees with them or wants to make some modifications, it's tougher for me, and I'll be interested. I mean, I agree with everything that you've said. And I'm big on group agreements and really like the concept. But first, I want to hear if people are on board with the concept. If we're on board with the concept of having this group agreement, I mean, other than what the city's rules and regulations say, we as a Transportation Commission want to operate this way as a group, then, maybe we write them up and take a look at them and see if we like them the way that they are, or if we want to make some modifications. Or if you have some suggestions tonight, we certainly can take those into account as we write them up. So what are people's thoughts? Chris?
Thanks. I just got some feedback. Are other folks hearing that? Okay, no. I think I'm good now. Okay. Yeah, I was going to make the same point that you did. And like, I love a lot of these group agreements from what I'm hearing, and I use similar agreements in other settings, but without having something to read, I just don't really know what like turning to wonder means and stuff like that. So, I think we need to sit with some of these concepts and fully understand them before we can really talk through them. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'm wondering though is, and something that I think we should talk through, maybe if we revisit this, is how this interplays with the flow of our meetings and Robert's rules and things, because I feel like a lot of these, it's going to be difficult to implement without turning to a much more conversational back and forth sort of flow, which I think for the efficiency of our meetings, we actually kind of need to get away from a little bit. So that's, I think, going to be a struggle in how we implement some of these rules or agreements.
Yeah, those are all great points, Chris. Yep. Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, like Chris, I'm familiar with. I've worded them a couple different ways of what you do, but I appreciate you bringing them forward. So I'd love to see them. And then also, if some of them are new concepts to me, so if there's anything that could be shared with, how we might do conversate. Well, depending on how we want to integrate them in the meeting. But if we decide to, then if there are suggestions on how we might start those conversations and bringing them out there. So always those tips are helpful.
Mm-hmm. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I actually have a question. So is this something that is only being done for the Transportation Commission, or is this something that we're doing for all city committees? Because, yeah, I mean, maybe we could learn from others who already have implemented this or are thinking about it. Because, yeah, I mean, it seems to possibly change how we're doing things quite a bit. And so I'm curious how this ties into other efforts at the city level.
Christy, can you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We've had a lot of requests for this type of conversation. So I will say that much. The level to which it's being facilitated, there's no overarching, like all BCCs are now engaging in group agreements. Groups that have taken racial equity and social justice as a core piece of their work, like yours, this is emerging as a need and as a practice. And so I think what's interesting here is that this came out organically out of the work that you all are doing around racial equity and social justice, and then thinking about like inclusion in this meeting.
Christy, I think you froze up there. Can you hear us?
Everything that I shared with you is a lot of internal practice. And so it might be just like a reorientation of like how you think about something before you respond, less about changing Robert's rules or adding time to our meetings. It's really like someone said something that's lightened something off. Let me think about my own positions, my identities, and how I'm going to respond. So I'll offer that to the group.
Thank you.
I could weigh in real quick too, just on that front. On that.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Tar.
You know, at the city, my observation over the past 10 or so years has been one group does something cool, and then a lot of other groups start copying it. And so when you ask the question, Harold, about like, are there other groups that have done this? Right. You're the group that everybody's going to copy. So I think that it's a really cool opportunity. I mean, I think that that this commission went down the road, and I appreciate, the questions and the work of Alder Harrington McKinney and Alder Miadzi and the chair, Ann Kovich, to like go down this road. But like the training on racial equity that this group did, that was new. Like commissions haven't boards, committees, commissions haven't done that yet. And what's happening as a result of going down that road hasn't happened yet. So this is all kind of venturing into a new space, which is frankly also a really exciting space, and I think a real opportunity for the city.
Tom, did you have a comment on that before we go on to Darren?
Did you ask me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for recognizing me, even though I'm not a commission member. So I'm just going to say I was challenged by some of what Urban Triage did. And I wonder if there's a way, maybe like what Harold said, maybe to step back and to take kind of what Chrissy said and then also what Brandy said and figure out, what is the right place for us. You know what I mean? Because it's to hear what Chrissy said, I have to digest that. And I'm going to be frank. I had to really digest what Brandy said, right. And some people are smiling because they did too, right? So, so rather than do two, I wonder, like, if are there like a couple themes, from our training and from what Chrissy said, that we could just say, all right, these are maybe values that we hold as a commission or policies, you know what I mean? And so I think what Chrissy's doing is there a way that we can institutionalize something, and but I don't want to do one thing and then do something different, but I'm wondering if there's a way that we can take the two things, the two experiences that we've had, and just kind of walk them together,
Yeah, well, I think we're talking about group agreements because of the training and because of our commitment to racial equity and social justice and everything else that we've done. So I think everything that people are talking about is let's have another conversation about this when we can have the pieces of paper in front of us and we can consider what they say and what they mean. Darren, go ahead.
Thank you. This falls outside of the group agreements conversation, and I'll understand if it come up for another time. But in just relation to equity and access, by us, the very nature we're meeting on Zoom, we're not accessible to everybody. And there's a lot of people that we are leaving out by meeting on this platform. And so will there ever be future discussions about where we meet? And I'm not even suggesting we meet in a city room every week, because again, that's an access thing. And so, do we bring that up of meeting places and how we make ourselves accessible to the public and the citizens of Madison?
Yes, and that certainly is something that we made the decision to be virtual for this year. And it certainly is something that we can put on the agenda again. Just for your information, there are some people who would not want to meet in person because of health reasons and other reasons. So there can be a trade-off too, Darren. But that is something that we certainly can put on a future agenda and will when we look at how we're going to conduct our meetings in 2023. And just point of information, and again, we can talk about this later on, but the Common Council Executive Committee is looking at hybrid meetings as a possibility as well. So more to follow on that. So a topic for another time. Denise, go ahead.
Thanks, Anne. I've got feedback as well. There we go. It went away. I just want to speak to what Christy said a couple of minutes ago, that it's not, for me, it's not an either or. Like, we have Robert's rules and we're, required to follow them. I would just invite us to notice who's included in Robert's rules and who's not, because it's a very complicated system. And sometimes I think it has negative impact for members of the public to want to try to figure out how to navigate it. So just need to say that out loud. But I think things coexist beautifully. Like, the stepping into wonder is very powerful, So I know that when I can feel my own judgment coming up or impatience, that's the very moment that I want to step into potentially asking a question that I don't know the answer to, because it gives me a whole new insight. And one of the ways I can see that living is, we rarely ask our folks that are here giving testimony any questions. And that's so confusing to them. I've had folks say to me, when I testify, what if nobody asked me a question? And it happens on the state assembly and Senate level as well. And I often have questions for the folks to learn more about their lives and how the decision that we're making would impact them. But then I feel pressured not to ask the question because I'm concerned about, how thick our agenda is and all the time that's going into it. So, coming with that spirit of wonder of one of our group agreements or one of our values would, give us maybe more permission to ask relevant, useful questions of the folks that testify before us. And, there's that sweet spot of efficiency. I get that. And what are we missing through the notion of being efficient?
Thank you, Denise. Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm going to be very honest here about how I feel about group agreements versus a commitment to racial and social equity and our work, what we are doing. And that is that I am less concerned, honestly, about the interactions between commissioners and more concerned about who gets to speak, who finds out about what we're doing, how they find out about the work we're doing, whether they can attend a meeting, whether their voice is heard, because honestly, most of the people who testify before us are privileged. I mean, they are. They have the time, they have the technology, they have the resources to find out about it. They have a good neighborhood listserv, or somebody's told them about it. They know how to speak before a commission. And I personally am much more interested in finding out how our decisions are being perceived, transmitted, understood by members of the public that don't get those neighborhood messages and don't have a lot of time to testify. And also, how do we do better outreach to communities and areas of the city that may not be heard? And also, how do we examine how our decisions impact those communities? So I am less concerned about the interactions between commissioners, simply because I think we're all pretty, we know what we signed up for, so to speak. And I think that we're pretty respectful of each other. I mean, things can get heated. I understand that. But I'm more worried about our interactions with the rest of the community instead of our interactions with each other. So that's just where I'm coming from. And I was hoping that that's what we were going to talk about. Like, how do we get more input from and become more accessible ourselves and our decisions and the city to people who we are not hearing from right now?
And we are going to talk about that, Robbie. That's absolutely what we're going to talk about.
Right. I just wanted to get that on the table because I'm less worried about a group agreement than the other stuff.
Sure. And I'm just going to make a comment, and then I see Rebecca has her hand up as staff, and then we'll get to the other commission members. But, we can, as a group, decide that we're working together fine. And once we look at the group agreement that we think we're cool and we don't actually need a group agreement, that's perfectly fine. This came out of a discussion that we had on accessibility. And Christy volunteered to come and talk with us about it, and we can decide where we take it from here. So let me just ask Rebecca if she has a comment on what was said, and then we'll get to to both alders who are next in the queue. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. I want to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca Hoyt. My pronouns are she, hers, and I joined the city in April as the Disability Rights and Services Specialist. And I am a person with a disability. I also use identity first language, so I identify as disabled. I really appreciate the discussion and this committee's leadership in this area. What I'm hearing as a theme is sort of the development of potentially other agreements for the group. And I want to offer a few that have been put forth to me or shared with me in disability justice spaces. And one is that all bodies and minds have needs, and a commitment to collective liberation. And I can see that some of that is already adopted as an agreement in this group as I look at people say, well, I really need information in writing in order to meaningfully access this discussion. I saw heads nodding about breaks. And so I see that there are some sort of seedlings of agreement already. And I just wanted to share that and hope that that is a stepping stone for developing additional agreements for your group.
Okay. Well, maybe you and Christy can get together and put together a document to forward, and then we can have it in front of us and consider it. Alder Miadzi, go ahead. Thanks, Rebecca.
I think Alder Barbara McKinney was ahead of me.
Yeah, you took your hand down, Alder Harrington McKinney. Did you wish to speak?
Let me speak. I'll speak because I am so pleased with the direction that this conversation is going. Tom kind of put it forward, but then Bobby summed it up. And so in my work with restorative justice, agreements is how we design to be with each other. I'm very, very comfortable in this group. It really is my desire to hear what those who don't have the opportunity to come to the table and express. And so that's the missing piece, because when we talk about community engagement is creating a table, and wherever that table is, so that people who can't come in have the opportunity to hear their voices heard. I just remember when I was a working mother who had to work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Wasn't that I didn't want to come to parent-teacher conferences. I had to work 3 jobs just to put food on the table. And so I feel very comfortable with this group. And some groups I don't feel comfortable in. But when we look at group agreements, it's how we decide that we are going to treat one another. And I think that since I've joined this group, I've never felt that I was outside of the group. I always felt that my input was valued. And so we have something to build upon. So I did not attend the training that you had with Brandy. That was my choice. And because I wanted you to experience that. I did not want to have my my biases to influence positively or negatively what you experience. But I do want to move forward, as Robbie was saying, is that how do we make, and that's what equity is to me, is that how do we create a table where people who can't get to our traditional spaces are heard, valued, and the decisions that we are making incorporate that. And so I took my hand down because I'm so pleased with what I'm hearing tonight. And I just wanted to ditto and say, thank you, Chair. You've done an excellent job. But I don't feel intimidated. I don't need everybody to agree with me how I vote. That's not where I am. But,
right.
But I do. I think that we are agreeable and we have respect for one another. And that's what I'm looking for.
Okay. Alder Miyadzi, thank you, Alder. Alder Miyadzi, go ahead.
I don't know. I always take a different approach than everybody else. So when I say this, I mean no disrespect to anybody at all. But if anybody has watched the Common Council, I tell you, there's so much divisiveness that's going on. When I came back from the National League of Cities, I made it a point to meet with everybody from the Common Council. And I tell you what, I've seen a dynamic change where, we're actually starting to get together. I mean, at first it was just, a lot of people agree. You got elected officials and other state legislators talking about how dysfunctional it is. So it's important to understand that meeting in person and really getting to know people is so important. I'm kind of glad about this group that we have a very good discussion, but in person is so much important about having a relationship with other colleagues. So I think one of my colleagues referenced to not really having that dialogue, but it's important. I think it's crucial. So I wanted to elaborate on that. I think Brandy Grayson's urban triage training was great. She talked about not really having a middle ground, right? That everybody, nobody's wrong, right or wrong. There can be a middle ground. So that training was very, very empowering in that perspective that we do need that. And I don't want to take away anything from this group, but there's some things that really shocked me. And I think that we definitely should have this kind of discussion, which is good. When I say certain things has happened that have actually grabbed my attention is I will still never forget that I was the only older person of color that was wanted to talk on the TPB meeting and was shut down. That will always be in my mind. And when I say that voices, we are the voices as policymakers of our constituents. To be shut down during a meeting was wrong. So what I say that is that if we had a relationship and known that what is coming out of Charles Miadze's mouth for his constituents that he's heard from, who he represents, I would have been allowed to speak. So I think having a relationship with each other first and knowing that we're about the city business, we're about not trying to judge one another. Nobody's right or wrong, but those are values that are instilled in me. So I think it's important that to have a relationship with each other. And as far as colleagues, I'm glad that we have a lot of respect, but there's still work to be done here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek. And then Tarek, you're next, and then Christy.
I really dig that y'all are having these types of conversations. That's a big deal. And I think, my tendency is also to let's get down to it. Don't need to worry about the group agreement so much. We're okay. And probably will be okay until you're not. When the membership of the body changes, however it looks like. And remember, this is a body that is exploring the space where others haven't before. And when I hear Alder Miadzi talking about relationships and the power of relationships, which are like nothing, everything comes back down to relationships. Nothing beats relationships ever in anything, in my experience. But those group agreements are about how we relate to one another. And even if there are no issues, it's, in my mind, it's worth taking a moment to understand why there aren't issues. And what is it about this group that makes it special in terms of how it interacts with each other? Because we have seen like other bodies that break down because of the ways in which they're interacting with each other. And all of that is so, so, so important. Because if you're really inviting people to come engage, to come to talk to you about, tables that you're setting, you want that to be a hospitable environment. And that's the part I think that we miss out on a lot of times. And we don't necessarily take the time to really think about that environment we're inviting people into. And how we are with each other influences how anybody else is going to be with us and how we're going to be with them in terms of community. So I get it. And I still think it's worth having the conversation, even if you decide to put it down. But do it intentionally.
Thanks, Tara. Christy, go ahead.
That's what I was going to say. So I'll keep it short. I'm so excited for you all to do what feels right for you all. That's y'all's decision to make. I hope that folks see that practicing equity with one another is never a distraction to the work. I truly believe that. It will never be a distraction because just like Tarek said, you got to set the table before you invite somebody. And we know historically that BCCs are the site of a lot of a lack of inclusion among one another, folks that aren't here because they feel that they might not be able to be here. And so just like knowing that this is a site of a place where folks have experienced historic marginalization, how can we practice to be better with one another as we do that with the folks we engage with in the public?
Okay, well, this is just the first part of our conversation. So everything that you've been talking about is what we're going to talk about next. So is there agreement that we would ask Christy, and Rebecca had some things she was thinking could be added to what Christy had said, that they put this in a document and send it to us and we put it on a future agenda item for us to consider group agreements. And then we can decide we're cool the way we are. We don't need it written down, or we want to take these, or we want to do something else. Are we in agreement that that's a good idea? Anybody opposed to that? How about that? If you're opposed to that, raise your hand. Alder Miadzi, you're opposed to that?
Well, I'm not opposed to that. Were you saying that we should add some things now, or is that a later discussion?
Well, what I heard from most people was they'd rather see it in writing, and then we could make decisions about whether we want to modify it. Would that be the preference? I personally have a little bit of a hard time when somebody just throws a bunch of stuff at me verbally and I don't have it in front of me in writing and have the opportunity to consider it. If you have something you want to throw on there now, that's fine. Otherwise, we would talk about it when we had it in front of us in writing.
I just had two of them. One was there's nobody. I don't know if it might fall under one of the ones that she mentioned, but there's nobody right or wrong. There can be a middle ground. Is that one of them? Or
I don't think so.
Okay. And the other one I was going to add is that I don't know. This is far-fetched, but I have what you call sometimes a spirit of discernment, where you're able to not really look at somebody and know that, to look at them and say, well, this person might be frustrated. This person, but not really judgmental, but how you could look at somebody and tell. So based on their spirit, you can actually know how to encounter them. So I guess what I'm asking for or saying is that to be able to work with people upon what, how should I say it? Let's not go through that. Let's not put that one down. But I'm just saying I have where I'm able to look at people sometime and be able to, if I see somebody's frustrated, be able to work with them and be able to come upon a middle ground. And so, but
that may fall under make space, take space, perhaps, Christy. Would you think?
I have to think about it more, but I think that the next step of like going in and adding and contributing would be good, because I'm sure there's folks that have other ideas that might build off that.
Okay, great. So we'll put that on TC group agreement on a future agenda, and we'll thanks Christy and Rebecca and Tarek for the comments that you made and everybody's comments that we've had so far. So we'll talk more about that. Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
I was going to ask when that does land on a future agenda, if there is any way that we give space and time to really explore that and not have one that's really a heavy agenda where we can really delve and to really get involved into that work.
Sure. I agree, because as you can see tonight, we're actually lucky that the traffic safety report was not here, so we actually have extra time for us to talk about this agenda item that we knew was going to take some time, but obviously we're spending more than I imagined on the first part of our discussion. But great point, Alder, and we'll take a look at the agenda when we put that on it. So the next piece is accessibility of TC meetings and TC materials. And I'm going to ask Denise to start off the conversation here, because it was because of comments and feedback that I received from Denise that made me think that our meetings and our materials needed to be more accessible. And so I would ask her to lead off our discussion about accessibility. And many of you started talking about this already, so we'll open up this topic. Denise, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. And thanks for the space for this. So I think many of you know I've been on Transportation Commission since November of 2020. And over the course of time, as someone who uses screen reading technology and uses magnification and contrast to access the materials, some of our materials are incredibly accessible, and some of them I have to figure out a number of workarounds in order to be able to review the materials in advance of the meeting so I can come to the meeting prepared. So we've been in conversation about increasing the accessibility of those materials, and that also includes the work that staff does when they're making presentations to describe some of what we're looking at on the detail maps, which I think is beneficial actually for everybody. Unless you're very used to reading those maps and come from an engineering background, getting a context of where this sits in the city, what other streets are near it, et cetera, is probably beneficial to many. So over the course of the last, year and a half or so, it's been really very gratifying to see staff continue to really increase how they do presentations in ways that create greater access. And then we're, looking at ways to continue to increase accessibility of the materials. But not only is this an issue for me, I think it has much bigger impact. So, I'm very aware that I am at least the only out person with a disability who serves on the Transportation Commission. I don't know really how many people with disabilities testify before us that we actually hear from. So many of the issues that we talk about have life-changing impact for people with disabilities across the disability spectrum. And so we're making really fundamentally important decisions about quality of life for people who have accessibility and mobility needs to be able to get to work, doctor's appointments, visit family, whatever. And so the underrepresentation for me is really super concerning. And sometimes I feel very burdened, like, oh my God, I gotta represent all the people, on Transportation Commission. So, when I think about accessibility, that ties in for me because if I, as a very experienced, highly trained person with access technology, is having to figure out workarounds, having to take probably more time to review materials in advance with a very heavy work schedule already, and the demands of that, and even trying to navigate Legistar. And I'm highly motivated as an advocate to do that work. Then what's that like for someone who's not familiar with the process, who doesn't have the same level of kind of training that I do to navigate things accessibility wise, who's nervous about appearing before this body or any other city body. And I think probably, I know we're missing the really valuable viewpoint of folks with disabilities in probably all of our commissions, housing and planning, all of those things impact the lives of people with disabilities. I'll often hear from our constituency in my role as executive director of the Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired, people concerned about X, Y, and Z that are transportation related things. And they'll come to me with them or pedestrian safety things. And I'll say to them, I can represent those concerns, but I would love for you to be at the meeting and to speak to it. And for those of us with disabilities, being able to get on Zoom is actually liberating because we don't have to factor transportation in to getting to a meeting, but still it's so intimidating. And then, looking at the materials and feeling like you're well prepared to be at the meeting, that folks don't do it. So I think when we're looking at the accessibility issues, you're really understanding that when someone can't get access to the materials, can't be on the same playing field, that's a form of harm as well and exclusion. And so as we continue to work together, really continuing to hold a high bar and raise the bar on what does it mean to create space for people with disabilities and making things accessible and usable. So that's a lot to digest, but I do also want to do a thank you because I know staff particularly have worked hard to make sure that I have the things that I can use in the best format possible. And we continue to talk about it and be in process about it. And it will be a process. It's not an easy fix to look at the volume of materials, particularly the map related ones, and how to increase the accessibility on them.
So I would say that as a result of some of the issues that Denise brought up, Gretchen has put together and is working on materials accessibility guide to help staff figure out how they can make the materials more accessible. So shout out to Gretchen for that. And Christy and Rebecca are working on a document called Best Practices for Inclusive Presentations. And that document will be available to help address some of these things. So Denise has opened up the door about a different kind of accessibility to our meetings and our materials than I had thought about in the past. And I have heard a lot of you talk about accessibility of our meetings in the more traditional way, the people who don't hear about the meetings, the less affluent people, or people who don't have the ability to get on a Zoom call because they don't have a device that will allow them to do that easily. So, we've spent a lot of time in a small group working specifically on certain of the things that Denise was talking about, but accessibility of our meetings, and I'll open up this part of the conversation to everyone to get your thoughts. Denise brought up a lot of good points about people who are disabled who may not have access to our meetings or may not be willing or able or brave enough to come forward for multiple reasons. But there's also a lot of other people that we've talked about. We've had lots of conversations at the Traffic Calming Subcommittee and here at our meeting earlier when we were talking about crossing guards and, who who can walk their children to school and who doesn't have the ability to walk their children to school, who learns about our meetings, who doesn't learn about our meetings. So how can we make the Transportation Commission more accessible? We're making inroads, and many of the things that Denise talked about, because staff is helping us with those and raising awareness. But what else can we do to make our meetings more accessible? And there's things that I would love to get your thoughts today and things that we can think about doing. And it's certainly a topic that will be back on our agenda as we talk about racial equity and social justice in our work and our continuing commitment. So I heard you talk about it earlier, Robbie. I heard everybody talk about making sure, Alder Herring and McKinney, Alder Miadzi, many of you talked about issues that relate to accessibility. And, who didn't hear about the crossing guard topic on our agenda? Who had concerns about that we didn't hear from? And how can we make sure that we do hear from the people that we're supposed to hear from? It's a continuing issue and will continue to be an issue, but we just want to continue moving forward. Alder Miadzi.
Well, I guess I need to study a little bit more. I'll be bluntly honest, in different capacities about disability, right? Learning on which spaces. I am blessed that Denise is here and she's engaged and she knows exactly what, I'm learning a lot from her. But in what capacities do you see normally where disabled people are at, right? So I've learned as an alder is that meeting people where they're at, right? So in what spaces can we get into to where people are disabled so that we can be able to make sure that their voices are heard, making sure that they have accessibility to no matter what barriers they might have, to make sure that they understand city policy and how that affects them and how can we help them. So I need to educate myself, and I'm glad this discussion came up about what areas or what capacities can I get into to make sure that their voices are heard. Thank you.
Denise, do you have any suggestions in that regard?
Well, just initially, and this would take a lot of, I think, processing to figure out is, how do we create hybrid environments? I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it taught us the value of both being together, but also creating spaces where people can be together and not have to travel. I think about folks that are immunocompromised or, have health issues. So, maybe they feel really good the day that the meeting is going to happen, but then, then that day they feel really poorly, but they could still join from home. So, exploring, and I frankly would have to really seriously look at my participation in the commission if we went back to mandatory in-person meetings, because I won't travel by myself in the dark. It's unsafe for me to do that, even if I was walking to Metro and riding Metro home. But, with some of our meetings getting over at 9:00, I would have to seriously evaluate whether I stayed on the commission. So, figuring out how we explore hybrid so that folks can join in the way that works best for them. Maybe we also have some of our meetings in neighborhoods so that we create a presence and make sure that we invite folks from that area. The thing about people with disabilities is we're everywhere in the city. And we don't, I think sometimes folks think we hang out together en masse, and, many of us with disabilities want to be integrated into, the full community. So, but, we could look at hosting a transportation commission meeting in, my office, or access to independence, or, things like that. I think we can get creative about where we meet and how we meet, and is a hybrid option something that we could start playing with. So those are just some of my, things that I've been chewing on as ways to create the win-win on this.
Yeah, and I've made a note to myself I've sat in on one Common Council Executive Committee on hybrid meetings, and I've been following some of their presentations on it. So I made a note to follow up maybe with Council President Furman with regard to the status of hybrid meetings, and because I think that's something I personally prefer Zoom for certain health reasons that I have as well. But again, that's it. That's accessibility is I've heard that a lot from people, in person versus Zoom, and there's pros to both in terms of accessibility. So I'll definitely follow up on that hybrid option, and lots of good suggestions there. Rebecca, go ahead.
Thank you. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I wanted to respond to the elder's question. So about 25% of the U.S. population is people with disabilities. It's one of the most diverse.
Did you say 25%?
25%, 1 in 4 people.
Wow.
It's one of the most diverse minority groups that anyone can become a member of, and many people will at some point in their life. I also just want to note this is not in any way separate from discussions around racial equity, because people who are below the poverty line and people of color are far more likely to be people with disabilities or to acquire a disability, and also more likely to experience inequities in healthcare and inequity in services that are directed to disability communities. So as a advocate for people with disabilities, I find it very difficult to separate disability issues from racial issues, and very difficult to separate racial issues from disability issues. But I appreciate Denise's comments that people with disabilities are in all spaces. The more welcoming and accessible spaces like this become, I think the more likely you are to have greater participation from the disability community.
Thank you, Rebecca. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate many threads of discussion that often converge, or sometimes they don't. I guess from my perspective is, our meetings are one venue where we have to have these discussions and questions. How do we make them more accessible? Who are they accessible for and who they are not? But I don't think that can be all we talk about. And I think we are having discussion and meetings where, for example, Alder Harrington McKinney will ask staff questions like, what was the public involvement process? Because, there's this chain where, some people will not come to our commission meetings for various reasons, because we do not create an environment where they're welcome, where they can participate because of some of these topics that we talked about. But I think we need to work on where they maybe also don't have to come, where they have different ways of having their voices heard, of influencing what staff brings to the commission, how we read about things, how we think about things. And so I think that's a whole nother piece of it that we have to keep working on, where maybe I don't think the ultimate goal is to have meetings for a transportation commission where 200 people show up and testify, because that quickly becomes very unmanageable. So we need to create processes where we create avenues for people to make their voices heard without having to come here, while still us having the ability to have an understanding. These are some concerns that people have. This is what should inform our decision making. So I think keeping track of that is important too.
Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, mine is a ditto of what Harold just said. You all haven't seen me work professionally, but I'm always about my 20 years of community development is engaging the hidden and missing voices. And engaging doesn't necessarily mean at this body, but what are all the steps along the way. And so I'd love to be part of any conversations and, more importantly, any solutions, and working with the city of Madison and our body, and how do we build those trust relationships? Because, again, to repeat, people don't trust us, they're not going to come talk to us anyway. And so who are the trusted partners that they will put the faith in to share honestly what they're seeing, what they're feeling, and what they're experiencing, so that information comes to us so we can make those decisions. So just count me in for anything like that.
Okay, great. Denise, go ahead.
I wanted to concretize what Harold and Darren were just talking about with the bus rapid transit work. There was an initiative to engage the disability community, and it was not that we all showed up at TPPB or Transportation Commission, but that there was active engagement. We had meetings at access to independence. We did surveys. There was David Childbridge was really highly involved in that work. And then that was fed into the systems. I didn't see it, so I think that we've got some mechanisms that have worked, in other times that really could be tended and enlivened again. And I felt like I knew where the disability community and all of its diversity stood on BRT really, really well. And then I could speak to that in the different venues where I had the opportunity to speak to it, the Vision Zero Task Force, is another. So are we really being as robust as we can with those initiatives, and exploring how to even increase the more robustness with them, because they're on the right track.
Mm-hmm. We had a long conversation about this with regard to the Safe Streets Madison program. Robbie, you said, how do we reach the people who are impacted by our decisions? And, Alder Figueroa Cole asked if we were going to be talking specifically about Safe Streets Madison tonight, but Renee and Tom and Yang and others are doing outreach to try and hear from Darren. You said the hidden and missing voices. That's our whole goal, is to reach those people. And Harold, great point. We can't have them all at our meetings because, Justin's not here to say, but what did they get, like 4,000 emails or something like that on the Metro Transit redesign? I mean, we can't have 4,000 people at our meeting testifying. I mean, that obviously won't work. So, how do we do that great process that we work so hard on with, and it's still in its infancy and growing for Safe Streets Madison? And I'm sure Renee's working on that, aren't you, Renee, with the schools for, crossing guards and safe routes to schools. So I think what we're talking about seems to be sort of at an initiative level, like you were talking about with BRT, Denise. And that's great when we have a program or we have something big that we're working on, like Complete Green Streets or the Metro Transit redesign or Vision Zero, et cetera. But what I'm also concerned about, or what you said, Robbie, if we have a resolution in front of us, how do we know that the people who are impacted by that decision that we're making know about it and, have had an opportunity to tell us what we think? So I think when we have bigger initiatives, everybody's doing really focused on that public outreach. But I think a longer term issue for me is making sure that people generally know how to find out what's in front of us and that we reach the people. I hate to keep quoting you, Robbie, but it really stuck in my mind, who are impacted by the decisions that we're making. So that's just what it's all about. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the point where we can work on that is where, we think about our policies and processes, where, we talked about the Crossing Guards program, where I think people made many good points about, potential shortcomings of how the process is set up right now, like how the scoring works. You mentioned State Street Madison, where we had an explicit discussion, plus rapid transit. And I mean, we can't do that every time. So our goal has to be to make policies and processes that ensure that, like, yeah, the affected people are part of the process, rather than, yeah, making like a good policy then will, I think, lead to outcomes where we don't have to, with each individual resolution, to think about like, oh, did we make sure we did something of that? Ideally, we can trust that we have built a process and we will regularly reevaluate the process based on the outcomes that we're seeing, that then ensure some of those goals that we want to have are actually in place. Because, yeah, we can't do it every single time, one after the other. I don't think that's feasible. And also not good for anybody, because then, you have to show up at every TC meeting, then you have to go to the council and show up again, because that's where the final decision is made. So, yeah, I think building on policies and keeping ourselves accountable to we're an implementation body, but we can provide feedback on policies and we can contribute to making good policies.
Excellent point. Robbie, go ahead.
So I sort of want to follow up on or amend my comment about making sure that the people who are impacted know about it. Because, again, I want to point out that we often hear from people, say, on a certain block or a certain neighborhood or a certain street, that they don't like what we're going to do, or they wish we'd do it differently, or something like that. But I think we also, as a committee, we have to realize that we are also making policy for the entire city. Mm-hmm. So one or two, a few people in a specific location may feel that this is going to negatively impact them, but it's going to be better for the entire city or the entire section of the city to have something change. So I just want to kind of put that out there, that we often hear from people, if we're taking parking away on a particular street, or prohibiting a left turn, or, I don't know, narrowing, widening, whatever it may be, changing a bus stop, I don't know. But we have to look at the overall impact for the whole city, and not just the individuals who had the time to come and show up and make their voice heard. So I just want to kind of throw that out there, and not just think about the people who do have time to come.
Absolutely. And we had a decision in front of us. Some of you will remember, and it was before you were on, Robbie and Tarek. I'll get to you in just one second. But we've had this conversation before, Robbie, and it's very, very important that we keep the focus, because who's impacted isn't just narrow. And I'm going to use the Spade Street speed hump discussion as an example. There were buses going down Spade Street, and we had a lot of people from Spade Street talking about these speed humps. Well, there were a lot of people riding the bus through Spade Street that weren't heard from. And that's just one example of where we stopped and said, okay, we have to think about who in the whole city is impacted by the decision. So it's a great point, and one that we always need to stop ourselves and ask as we're making those decisions, because it's not just the people who are at the table, it's the people who aren't at the table that we have to represent as well. Tarek, go ahead. Oh, I might have stole that from you. You told me that one time, Tarek. So
we've all said a lot of things in a lot of places. Goes around, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This isn't in reaction to anything anybody said. It's just more, I kind of felt compelled, just given the nature of the conversation. So this can get a little dangerous, but also I think part of where we get stuck sometimes in these kind of conversations, and this is all right on, but is thinking that we have to hear from somebody about every given thing. So like right. The Leland The crosswalk at Leland. People have been talking about that in so many different forums, or not the crosswalk, the crossing guard, the need for a crossing guard at Leland. People have been talking about that for 10 years in every venue that I've like come in contact with people in Balsam Russet area. They've been talking about that. And they might not just show up at this meeting, but it's really important that we're able to, and it's hard because we don't know what we know as a city. We don't know, like we don't collectively hear the stuff, but as best as we're able, just keep in mind that we have heard from a lot of people about a lot of things. And that's the same kind of thing when people talk about like the frustration, they've said things. And so it's incumbent on us to really apply what we've learned, what we've heard over time, even if it's not showing up in that particular space at that particular time around that particular issue. That doesn't mean that people still haven't given voice to it. So it's a tricky equation, but it's an important one to at least take note of, I think.
No, thanks very much. I appreciate that. So accessibility and how we improve accessibility is going to be a continuing effort. And, how we go about that is certainly something that we'll need to continue to work on. Denise is obviously very interested in this. Darren, I heard you saying that you're interested in this. So, we'll have to think about how, as we continue in our effort to improve our commitment to racial equity and social justice, I think accessibility is one of the key topics that we keep coming back to. So we'll have to do some more work on in that regard and figure out how best we can continue to attack it. Other comments on that? Otherwise, we'll move on to talking about the training. Anything else on accessibility right now? Okay, we had 6 training sessions from February 2nd to April 6th put on by Urban Triage, and I found it to be, it was an investment. You had to be willing to make an investment in the time and the effort, which it certainly was. And I found it to be very valuable, but I only found it to be worthwhile because it was a journey. Where I was at the beginning wasn't where I was at the end. I really viewed it as a journey. And I very much appreciated it. So I thought what might be the best way, and we met as a small group and talked about how could we possibly share 6 weeks worth of jam-packed ideas, and decided that we would share some positive takeaways. And I'll start with one that I had. And then I think Alder Miadzi was talking about one earlier. Ask people who attended the training to share positive takeaways, to let people know what how the training impacted you and maybe changed how you view things. Because I think that I can tell you for sure that I have incorporated some of these things into not only my work on TC, but into my personal life. And it really helped me understand myself better. And I really felt that I definitely benefited from it. So we spent some time talking about cognitive dissonance and how that tends to keep us in our comfort zone, our own fishbowl, if you will, not allowing us to easily accept or value the opinions of others. Because if we're right, they're wrong. I mean, that's how we think. And as Alder Miadzi pointed out earlier, that doesn't have to be the case. Just because we think one way doesn't necessarily mean we're right. So this whole cognitive dissonance kind of keeps us in our comfort zone and away from other people. So the thought of a different way of thinking about it and challenging ourselves and myself to move out of my comfort zone, move out of my fishbowl, helps me engage better with others. So that was one of the big takeaways for myself. So I'm going to throw it open, and this is to staff who participated in training, as well as the TC members who participated. What other positive takeaways do you have from the training that you'd be willing to share with other people? Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Ann. I think you stole my... I went through my notes this afternoon before this meeting because I was able to attend 5 of the 6 sessions. And the fishbowl really stuck out as the one thing that you say, well, okay, you invested this time. What are the takeaways that you will remember, or that you can adapt or implement it in your own life, or in this case, in the TC meetings and so forth? But the fishbowl was the one that, as soon as I saw that this afternoon, I said, "Yep, that's it. I remember that. I remember that discussion, and that you've got to get out of the fishbowl to get a reference point." And so that was my big takeaway from the best that it was very interesting training. I will say that I don't think I'd ever participated in training as I'll say it was. I don't want to say it was unique, but I think it was certainly conducted different than what I was expecting the training to be. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Alder Miadzi, you're next. Go ahead.
I guess I only attended the meeting for 1 hour, so and it was only one meeting. So I like to go on record of saying that. But it was the most empowering hour, I have to say. I like being in capacities where I can learn, but one thing I did learn as far as always thinking that, I'm right or the other person's wrong, but to be able to be in a space where I'm comfortable is trying to, have a medium ground of, trying to come upon a compromise, which is very empowering because it helps me on the council floor that, when it's time for discussion, I don't always have to be right or try to actually discuss and understand, like I said before, having a spirit of discernment where you're kind of like understanding where that other person is coming from and trying to come up on a median ground. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. It is powerful, isn't it? And that whole cognitive dissonance thing, where just because I think this way doesn't mean that I'm necessarily right. It was a pretty powerful thing to talk about, wasn't it? Yeah. Yang, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be really quick. And I kind of, for this one, I kind of build on, what you already said. But one of the things I feel strongly and I really identify with is, the notion that compassion flows from empathy. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that, we listen. We thought we are good listeners, right? We let others to speak, and we listen to them. But in the end, the others feel like we didn't hear. We didn't hear them. Even we thought we tried. We're a really good listener. We listen. I think just as what you all said. We're like the Facebook example. We were all shaped and defined by our past experience. Our thinking was defined by that. So sometimes it's really hard to see others' perspectives. To the extent others really appreciate. So I think have some empathy really helps a lot on that. If we can really put ourselves in other people's shoes, we can feel maybe what they feel, and we can understand better what they need. So I think that will help us as we make decisions for our day-to-day work, maybe at the commission as well. I feel just remind us about that has a lot of value. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the points that Brandy made was that effective listening requires sharing back to confirm that there's shared understanding. And that sort of takes me back, Denise, to what you said earlier, that we don't often ask questions of people who are making comments in front of us. So perhaps they think we didn't hear them because we didn't check back with them to make sure that we understood. So that was another interesting comment that she made. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I will. Well, so as you said, Anne, it was very much about the experience, of going through that. So we had lots of vulnerable and uncomfortable conversations. So I'm not going to try to summarize any of the key takeaways. I think we could pick up on snippets, but I did want to add that through that, several of us got to go into breakout sessions with each other and actually like have conversations with each other that we do not get to do here, and we haven't gotten to do, especially being virtual. And so that's, something that I think was much easier when we were in person, and probably we ought to figure out how to do more often, because I think that helped some of us understand each other a little bit better and have those conversations.
Yeah, great point, Chris. Thanks. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Brandy pushed us to be uncomfortable, right? And so that's good, right? Because when we're comfortable, then we kind of think the way we do. I wrote down, I looked through my notes, and things, we see what we're conditioned to see. And she gave several examples, where she would have phrases where words were repeated and we never even saw the repeated word, right? Or what was it, the gorilla that went through that basketball team? Remember that? But it's kind of interesting that, we kind of know what we expect to see. And so that's how we see things when events happen, rather than just, she talked about how we give events meaning. The meaning, the events are kind of without meaning. And I kind of challenged her on that, and she pushes back. It's interesting, that. But then she went on to say, that trauma shapes that meaning, for a lot of people. And so when other people react a certain way, we think, well, that's an inappropriate reaction. Well, their story is different than ours, right? And their reaction to a certain circumstance or policy is not wrong. It's just shaped kind of perhaps by the trauma in their life. And then, she kept on using the words white supremacy, right? And everyone who's white just kind of squirms at that, right? Because it's an uncomfortable word and phrase. But she kind of defined it as who has the power? Right now in society, who has the power? And when you think about it, our systems are kind of set up so that many of us who are educated or have access to systems, we have the power. And so and that's actually when we think about this committee and the TPBB and council and the city staff, we all have power, right? We can change people's lives. And so I guess it was a challenge on how do we use that power, and so I'm going to just say some of the training was uncomfortable, but it's probably good to be uncomfortable. And I was interesting, I wanted to, because I know Bill was in all these sessions. I was thinking, well, what's Bill thinking and what's Chris thinking? But it was and even Harold too, right? All of you guys were there, and so it was interesting. So thank you.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, it was a journey, and there were times I was uncomfortable, and it was interesting because I got comfortable toward the end with being uncomfortable. So as stupid as that sounds, it was kind of a huge breakthrough for me anyway. So the training brought through a lot of the things that we've talked about. I mean, who has the power? How do we reach the people who we need to hear from? And a lot of times the people with power, the affluent, or the people, who have the resources and understanding about our commission are the people that we hear from. And so, as Harold pointed out, we have to make sure we have policies and outreach. And you mentioned, everybody mentioned it. I don't want to point people out, that it's not just what happens at TC, it's also what happens outside of TC, and what staff can do, and how we have the process or the policy set up can ensure that additional outreach. And that we have all the voices at the table that we need to hear from, or that we've heard from them, even if they're not at the table, I guess. So other thoughts about the training? it was great. And thanks to Tom and everybody and Yang and Gretchen and everybody who helped make the training possible, because I think it was well attended by TC members, and I think it accomplished what was our goal. So thanks so much for making that happen. So this was part of our commitment to including racial equity and social justice in our work. And so that's just one piece of where we are. So the question is, next steps. Where do we go from here? We're working on materials, accessibility guides, and inclusive presentations, so we can, those are going to help. And thanks so much to staff who've been working on those. We've talked about looking at policies. We're going to look at the crossing guard material and the factors there to see if we can change those to incorporate equity into them and whatever else might need to be changed. One thing that additional training is certainly a possibility, but we don't have money for that. So it would have to be free, right, Tom and Yang? So Tarek, maybe there's some free, sessions that we could benefit from that you could share with Aiden, and we could share with the link. But before I turn it over to Tarek to help us think about next steps, we have one really big thing coming up. And I want us to think about everything that we've talked about tonight as we think about how to handle a public hearing on the Metro network redesign. And how do we handle the discussion about the equity analysis? And Justin's not here tonight. He's out of town. But we've had conversations about this, Justin and I have, and we've talked about this a little bit already. And we talked about it some when we talked about the TPPB decision on the policy piece of it. So I think this is a big opportunity for us to think about accessibility and to make sure that we think about how we can gather all of the information that we need. And I think Metro is certainly working on doing that, which they have been all along. I mean, they've done a great outreach in this regard. So Tarek, next steps. You've been with us for this whole journey, so thank you so much for that. But how do we continue on down the path to make sure that we keep the momentum going?
Well, one question is that for tonight? This is rhetorical, but is that for tonight or is that for another night? There's been a lot that's come up. And I think we talked about like the need to digest and so on. You're going to have a conversation around, what was it? Just how you want to be with each other.
Group agreements. Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there are going to be other aspects that start to emerge, but I guess two thoughts that I have. You can do this now or you can come back later. I would probably suggest coming back later. Mm-hmm. So the question that you all just dug into in terms of like, what were your positive takeaways from the training? Okay. And some of you all went into this, but just taking it a little bit differently. So given the training, the positives and the negatives, how does that make you think about how you want to approach your job here, your work on this body differently? There was already the comments about like, we don't ask people follow-up questions when they come and testify. Okay, so there's something to that, like checking our understanding. But really, based on what you've gone through, how does that affect? Like, what are those things that you think of like, oh, I could do this differently? Or this is a place where I've been making assumptions. This is where I haven't been giving the benefit of the doubt or being as universal in terms of my thinking about like really understanding where people are coming from. So I think that's an important question to dig into.
Okay.
The other one is going back to when Alder Miazzi asked about the racial equity analysis and was talking about with that, like it's really important that we're doing racial equity analyses. And it's also really, really important. I mean, you've got 3 questions at the top of each of the agendas. that go through like who's at the table, who's not at the table, what's working, what's not working. But there are questions throughout that racial equity analysis that really get to that. And all of everybody that's part of this group can be continuously exercising the muscles to have those be just kind of automatic thought processes more and more and more, but that they're part of every kind of decision-making turn that we take without necessarily going through an analysis, which isn't to dismiss the analyses at all. It's just to say, how do you take those questions, those principles that we've put on the page to force the conversation and really make those conversations happen just as a matter of routine? So really incorporating those questions, those principles of analysis, which are fundamentally principles of inclusion. And as we get down into it, belonging into the way in which you all are doing your work. So I think those are some things for this body to wrestle with, to think about independently, come back to, and think about like, so what does that end up meaning in terms of how you really ingrain this into your work on an ongoing manner?
Okay. So I don't know that we have the energy to do that tonight. And I think it would be good to let people think about it before we would come back. So it seems to me that an agenda item, a follow-up agenda item on, again, incorporating racial equity and social justice in our work, we could talk about the training and how we're applying that in our work. And Tarek, maybe have you walk us through the racial equity and social justice tools so that we have those questions and better understand those questions. Would that work?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then I guess the only other one that I need to think about some more, and I want to get some thoughts from people with regard to accessibility. I mean, would it make sense to form a subcommittee and ask Denise and Darren and whoever else might be willing to work on it to figure out, are there ways to make TC more accessible to the hidden and missing voices? Do I have that right? Because everybody talks about the people that we're not hearing from that maybe we should. And Harold, you had some good points about it. Or is it still a conversation for our whole commission? That maybe we wrap that, perhaps that's a better way, is to continue with the 2 points that Tarek had, just, add in, accessibility as another topic for us to think about between now and then. And, what ideas do you have about how we can make it TC more accessible? Because you all had a lot of great ideas tonight. Harold?
I think I would caution against already forming some sort of committee, because I think we want to be very intentional about what we're asking the subcommittee to do, because there's so many different ways of thinking about what accessibility means, and we talked about a lot of them. Is it about accessibility in terms of, I'm not going to repeat all of that because we've already said that. So I think having not asking a subcommittee to take on a thing that is too big to be taken on, or that we don't have a clear understanding of what we're asking them for. I think that would be wise.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Rebecca, go ahead.
You had mentioned access to free trainings, and I just want to offer myself as a resource if you're interested as a committee in training on accessibility in virtual spaces or in hybrid spaces. I'd be more than happy to share my experience and expertise.
So maybe you and I could just get together and, I don't even know what's available. Maybe you could just help us figure out what's available, and then we as a group could decide. Does that sound good, Rebecca?
Absolutely. And I think many things that I would share are just small adjustments to the way that your meetings already run that create opportunities for inclusion.
Okay, great. Thanks. Alder Miazzi, go ahead.
I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought, but something came up on my mind. I don't know if I don't know exactly what Harold or what my colleague was saying, but I think it's important that any work group that we can definitely get started. I would hope my colleagues will definitely support it when it's around inclusiveness. I think every committee should actually have a subcommittee about that, because on the Common Council floor, let me tell you this, when we talk about looking at the data, a lot of people's voices aren't heard. And sometimes I wonder, I know that if you take the class that you guys are talking about trying to make sure that, I guess you guys probably had a different perspective now about what it is to be inclusive, right? Mm-hmm. So I definitely would caution anybody not to go up on the route where, there's so many avenues. As I sit here as an alder, there's so many avenues that we talked about NAACP being a person that reaches the community to actually talk about the equity standpoints of the BRT, right? So we talked about, when I think about all the African American churches that are in Madison here, every one of them has about 200 people that attend those churches. Just imagine how powerful it is when we talk about not hearing voices of the marginalized community, right? So when we talked about 25% of people have disabilities, how huge is that? And how many times do we see them not at the table? So this is so huge that if we decided to actually have a work group about reaching the community, this is a time. Let's stop having where Madison is one of the worst places to have a marginalized community grow up in, but to be the number one place. And this is how we get there. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think great comments, Alder. I think from Harold, to follow up on Harold's point, I think we as a group need to keep talking about it, because I don't think we have defined what we would want a group to do. And Tarek, I know that the city is working on a lot of things. The group that talked about how to change how the city works, and they're talking about having changes with regard to boards, committees, and commissions. There's a lot of things that are being done at the city level, and Alder Miazzi and Alder Harrington McKinney, you may know more about that than I do, but we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to be working at cross purposes with things that are going on elsewhere in the city either. So I think it's important for us to be informed about that as well. Does that make sense, Tarek? Okay. All right. So I'll put those 3 topics on for our next steps. And thanks. Alder Miazzi, go ahead.
I definitely agree. Let me apologize and make sure that, when I say things, and if there's anything to be cleared up what I say, I think it's important to I work third shift, so sometimes I might hear things backwards, but I love the fact that you clear that up, because I think that is a valid point to make sure that people know that that there is a course of order, right? We just don't jump in and do things, right? To make sure that we have things aligned. So I agree with everybody with what they're saying, and always, like I said, I always try to be that middle person and try to talk about how we can move the city forward. So thank you.
Yeah. No, I was right there with you, Alder. I mean, I asked, should we form a subcommittee? And Harold, you really stopped me. And I was trying to think, well, what exactly would we have the subcommittee do? And I hadn't quite gotten there yet. And that's obviously critical. If we're going to form a group, we have to know exactly what they're going to do. So great conversation. And Tarek and Rebecca and Christy, very much appreciated everybody joining us tonight to have this conversation. And big shout out to the group. Christy and Rebecca and Gretchen are working on those tools, those guides, and Denise is providing them with feedback on them. So many people have been working on things offline. I just want to, and Tom and Yang and Gretchen, we wouldn't have had that training if it weren't for you. So thank you so much for all the work. I mean, I forget how many proposals you got from the RFP, and staff went through all of those and had meetings and did all of that work preparing the RFP and holding those meetings and negotiating contracts and things. And we wouldn't have had that great training if you hadn't done that. So big shout out to everybody who's been working offline to accomplish that. And, really, I feel good about the conversation that we've had, but we all recognize there's a lot more work to do, but that means we're on the right track, right, Tarek?
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track. And I just encourage you, two things, a request, I guess, as you go forward and you're doing this work. One, and I know it's literally recorded to the cloud or whatever, but take note of the journey. Pay attention to the decisions you make, some of the things that you wrestle with a little bit, because this is a story that's going to have to be told to others to help other groups, other BCCs come along and do the same thing. And then also, I think, have that awareness as you're doing it. And so you're going to be having some of these conversations around, from the standpoint of the Transportation Commission, right? But try to also sometimes go a little bit broader and say, what would be good for boards? Wouldn't it be great if all boards, committees, and commissions did this? This is a bottom line that we think each of these bodies should be doing. Because you really are going into a space, collectively, because of the alders on it, because of the membership in general on this group, because of the staff you've got. This is not something that happens with, or hasn't happened so far with other boards, committees, or commissions. And so I really do see this as one of the ways in which the city is going to move ahead based on what you do. So I think, it's a little bit of healthy pressure. And I think we can all carry it well and, know that we're acting a little bit bigger than just this body.
Thanks. Well, we all agreed we're committed to this. It's in our work plan. So I appreciate that. And I feel good about the fact that we've taken another step in the journey. Let me put it that way. So other comments or questions about TC practices of equity and inclusion? Alder Miadzi.
Yeah, I just wanted one quick, I know I kept this meeting long, but let me just say this, I really appreciate all city staff, and even us being here, but it's not our fault that a lot of people are not at the table that don't really have the chance to speak, right? But it's important to me as an alder understand about parents that work two jobs, that it's hard to be able to be in these spaces, right? So I just wanted to take my hat off that to city staff. I always try to make sure I say that, because sometimes when people speak about the racial analysis study not being there, the data not being there, we don't realize sometimes how much city staff, how many hours they put in, how, Tom Lynch is always responsive. Tal is always responsive. These guys, Tarek is always there. He's putting in the work, but it's important to understand that it's not city staff's fault for not really having all the data, but it's important that I, as an alder, and other people, we come together as a community. So I sometimes I always want to make sure I give a shout out to city staff for all the work that they do. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I just want to follow up, and if I may, and Steve Brist is on. He's been on. Steve, I think you've sat in on almost all of our meetings, maybe all of them, and that kind of support is. Well, I may not talk to Steve during the committees all the time. There are lots of times outside of committees where I'm asking him things and working with him, and he's helping guide our work. So there's a lot of staff that goes beyond what we see here, who helps us do our work. So, Yang and Tom and everybody, if you carry that, our thanks back to everybody, because, we can't do our work without the great work that you do. So Alder, thanks for reminding us of that. Any other comments on TC practices of equity and inclusion? Great discussion, and thanks to everybody for all your thoughts in that regard. Okay, item 6. We need to select a chair and a vice chair. Just a reminder that there was a change in the ordinances this past year regarding whether an alder can be elected chair or vice chair of any BCC. And Steve and I talked about this offline, and basically, I won't bore you by reading the ordinance to you, but basically what it means is that an alder may not serve as chair or vice chair unless no citizen or resident non-alder member is not willing to do so. So we have to try for non-alder members first, and if there aren't any, then an alder could be selected. Do I have that right, Steve?
Yeah, yes, you have it right. That's what we discussed.
Okay, so I just wanted to make that clear because that's a change from last time. Robbie?
Moving things along, I would like to move Anne be the chair. Do we do chair and co-chair separately?
We do.
With the Kenworth Truck Factory.
A second.
There's a motion and a second. Other people have hands up. Are there any other nominations?
He was proud of it.
And thank you for the honor of being nominated. I appreciate it. Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay. Is there a motion to close the nominations and select a chair? Robbie?
Yes, so move.
Bridget, is that a second? Okay. We can assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody would like to vote no, abstain, or have a roll call vote. If so, please raise your hand and we're happy to do that. Okay, seeing none, there's a unanimous consent vote, and thank you very much. I'm honored to continue serving as your chair. Is there a nomination for vice chair? You know, Chris is our current vice chair, so. Robbie?
Move Chris continue as vice chair.
Alder Miazzi, is that a second?
Yes, I second it.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Chris, are you agreeable?
Yes, and I would just like to add to that I am happy to do this mainly because of the work that you do and to make the meetings easy. The draft agendas that get shared around and the notes that are prepared before this meeting put me at ease. So thank you.
No, you're most welcome. Are there any other nominations for vice chair?
I move that the closed.
Okay, so you're moving that the nominations be closed and we select the vice chair. That is Chris. Bill, is that a second?
That is a second.
Okay. All right. We'll assume a unanimous consent vote that Chris be reelected to continue as vice chair, unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain or have a roll call vote. So please raise your hand. Okay, see no hands raised. Chris is elected to continue serving as vice chair, and thanks so much, Chris. We appreciate it. Okay, and thank you very much for your confidence in me. Item 7, we learned after the agenda was published that the TPPB meeting on Monday was canceled. So, Chris, there really isn't, and Alder Harrington McKinney, there really isn't anything to report, correct? Okay.
Correct.
So, all right, and I actually have no announcements. The chair, future agenda topics. So we have what's out in Legistar, and Safe Streets Madison may be on the July 13th meeting. We'll check on that. Other topics that we added this evening are the RTC group agreement, which we'll try and put on a light agenda so we have plenty of time to talk about it. The walking school bus program, meeting in person versus virtual. I think we need to or hybrid. I might add that. So we need to have some more research done, and we've already had our meetings set for this year. So we will follow up on that. The next steps in racial equity and social justice, add that on. And Bill, did you have a topic to add?
Yes, I do. And I think you touched on it, but I would like to formalize that, and that is to have a item on the agenda, a future agenda item, to discuss how we're going to conduct the hearings for the network redesign of transit. I think if I could speak to that, briefly as to preparing for that discussion, I would like to say just a comment or two.
Okay. Well, Steve has corrected us in the past that this section, we can just talk about what's going to be on the agenda. We can't actually talk about the item tonight. Correct, Steve?
Correct. And I don't want to talk about it, but I would like to prepare so we can have a good discussion about that at that meeting. And what I'd like Steve to make sure Steve is there for that meeting, as well as Tom Lynch, and preferably also to have Yang at that discussion, because I'd like to know specifically, and so that the research ahead of time is the ordinance as far as what type of public hearing we can have, or is there are there defined set of rules for what constitutes a hearing? So I'd like to know where our boundaries are as far as
sure.
To know what those are specifically to make sure we're in compliance for the city. Because if we don't, then I don't think we're doing justice to have that discussion.
So what I'm hearing you suggest, and I think it's sort of a follow-up as to what we talked about earlier under racial equity and social justice, is that we have, instead of just having an agenda item which schedules the actual public hearing, we want to have an agenda item where we talk about how we're going to conduct the public hearing.
That's what I would like to talk about.
Okay. And Steve, if we could have you there for when we talk about that, that would be great. Because
I hope we can arrange that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So how to conduct, and we should have that maybe sooner rather than later, because I think Tom Lynch had a comment about how some things changed like right before they had the TPPV public hearing. So I think we want to make sure we give ourselves and Steve, don't we want to have a pretty long runway before the public hearing to have this conversation?
Well, I think you want to do your prep work ahead of time. Yes.
Okay. All right. So Tom, we'll have to figure out when to schedule that, right?
Yeah, I stepped away for a second, but right now our consultant is doing a pretty thorough equity analysis, which includes access for different demographic groups. And that's moving forward, and we'll be meeting with DCR this week. So that work probably needs to be prepared, and then specifically, the TC will be approving kind of the route scheduling, which is kind of when we put the buses and where we put them, and that's a fair amount of work, as well as the stop locations. And so I imagine that, Justin and I, he's always an optimist, and so he always thinks that it'll get done quicker. My guess is that it'll be a couple of months before our consultants can provide the materials that are necessary.
Right. But what we're talking about is having a conversation at TC about how to conduct the public hearing once we schedule it. So that's like a separate agenda topic about how to do it and how to make sure that it works out the best that it can. So if we had that if we had that in a month, that might be good timing, right?
And I maybe it might be worthwhile to have a more individual conversation with someone from IT as well as from DCR, because a lot of it has to do with, we have these APMs.
Okay.
And
all right. So we'll have to figure out who has to be at the meeting, right, Steve? So we'll talk offline about that.
Yeah.
So. Okay, great. All right. Excellent. Bill, I appreciate that. because I knew we wanted to talk about it, but it's good to think about talking about it before we even actually schedule it. Okay, anybody have any other future agenda topics? Okay, thanks so much for everything we talked about this evening. And it was really excellent conversation about the crossing guards in particular, as well as racial equity and social justice. So I feel real good about where we're at with both those things. So entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, Chris, that's a motion. Bill, is that a second? And I see thirds and fourths and fifths. And so I assume we have a unanimous consent vote to adjourn. And thank you, everybody, so much. Robbie, did you have something else? You had your hand up. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Much appreciated.